Hello?
Hello.
What's up?
What are you up to?
Well, it's Friday night. I was just gonna make some popcorn and watch a YouTube video.
YouTube? What's your favorite YouTube channel?
Well, I've been watching Cinematography all my life, so that's probably my comfort channel. But I've been really digging Chris Stuckman's and Dead Meat's videos.
Oh, so you like to watch videos about movies, huh?
Yeah, but I prefer the channels that clearly love and celebrate the art of film rather than the ones that get angry and nitpicky about them. They're kind of ridiculous.
Do you like scary movies?
Why, yes I do. In fact, I kind of have to get going.
Wait,
Sorry about that.
hang on.
Hey there, it's been a while, but you know what? Great work takes time, and tonight we'll finally be able to talk about one of my favorite slashers of all time. Hey dude, I'm kind of trying to film a video right now.
Hang up again and I'll gut you like a fish and rip your insides out, you...
What's up with that guy? You see, it's tough making YouTube videos. There's always things or people that can get in the way. But throughout the last year, I've been studying of what makes a successful YouTube video essay. And I've learned a few things. There are certain rules one must abide in order to create a successful YouTube video essay. For instance, when you start the video, you have to make sure you slowly walk in, sit down, and then drink some sort of liquid. It could be coffee or extra points if it's alcohol. Then add some groovy text on top of that, and you'll have a great video. Here, let me show you. Why is Scream so important? Well, I could give a pretty quick explanation, but that's not as informative as I'd like it to be. So let's jump in and talk about where the horror genre was prior to this film, the origins of the script, and the incredibly difficult situations the filmmakers faced that could have led to a very different film. So grab your popcorn and get ready to learn how Scream made its journey to its final picture. Horror films have been with us since the dawn of cinema. In the 1920s, we had silent films like A Nightmare, Nosferatu, and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. The 30s and 40s were packed with the Universal monsters taking over Hollywood. The 50s were a decade full of aliens, cheesy monsters, and all the its we needed, like From Hell It Came, It the Terror from Beyond Space, and It Came from Beneath the Sea, which were all an outcome of fears from the Cold War.
Watch the skies, everywhere. Keep looking. Keep watching the skies.
The 60s and 70s then brought a fresh and more violent wave of horror films. Movies like Rosemary's Baby, The Omen, and The Exorcist made audiences fear the devil.
That the power of Christ compels you!
Night of the Living Dead made us fear resurrected corpses.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
And the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween made us fear serial killers.
I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Now we reach the 80s, when the last big horror boom happened. There were slashers, gore, nudity, and kills like never before.
I thought you said if we destroyed the brain, it'd die.
It worked in the movie!
Well, it ain't working now, Frank.
In the movie line?
Hollywood knew horror was cheaper and easier to produce while returning a hefty profit.
I wonder how much they'd pay for it up to college.
After a great decade, people were starting to get a bit bored. Many beloved horror movies were sequeled out and turned into horror comedies.
I kick ass for the Lord.
Hell, a frightening antagonist like Freddy Krueger went from being a horrifying, mysterious killer to a rap star alongside the Fat Boys. Which, I can't lie, I do listen to it on repeat every October.
Elm Street's the place, you got the time. Listen to this, you'll bust the ride. Fred Krueger's the myth, but Fred Krueger's the man. It doesn't matter because I'm still rapping about him, understand?
Clearly, the horror genre was slowing down. This led us to the 90s, a slow decade for horror.
This means war.
Instead of making over-the-top films with supernatural elements, Hollywood started focusing on making movies more realistic and gritty, which could be considered a throwback to the type of horror films we got in the 60s and early 70s. Yes, we had great films in the early 90s like Candyman, Tremors, Silence of the Lambs, and Misery, but it's clear from the pictures released during this time that studios weren't eager to make horror, so the genre was on hospice. However, at least TV was starting to create spooky shows for not only adults, but for the kids who were feeling brave. This would introduce a new generation to the horror genre who would grow up and make their own scary films. At this time, a 25-year-old screenwriter out of college named Kevin Williamson is trying to break into the film industry. Williamson had just sold his first feature script, Killing Mrs. Tingle, to Interscope and was supposed to be directed by Gremlins director Joe Dante, but the film got stuck in development hell. It wouldn't get made until 1999 when it became Williamson's one and only feature, which would be retitled Teaching Mrs. Tingle due to the Columbine shootings that occurred exactly 4 months prior to its release. Desperate for a job 4 years later, the now 29-year-old screenwriter decided to house sit for a friend. While alone, he started learning of a Florida serial killer who went by the Gainesville Ripper. This man would mutilate bodies in disturbing ways and would pose them before fleeing the scene. This reminded Williamson of a fictional character from his favorite horror film, Halloween, which he saw in theaters when he was around 10 to 12 years old and remembered it being one of the greatest experiences of his life. This low-budget flick would help him realize what he wanted to do when he grew up. Williamson looked over and saw an open window in the house and couldn't remember whether or not it was already like that. Being a horror fan, he plays it safe, grabs a butcher knife, and starts walking around the house. He calls his friend and tells him he's unsure if someone is in the house with him. While Williamson was walking around, his friend started messing with him by doing the Friday the 13th and saying Michael Myers was in the house. Then Williamson replied, "Nope, that's Jason," which led to a debate regarding serial killers in the movies. Then he got an idea. Considering that this new generation of teenagers grew up with easier access to movies, thanks to rental stores, they should be aware of familiar movie tropes, what to do and what not to do if they were put in a horror film. That seed of an idea quickly developed into a revolutionary project that would completely reinvent the way horror movies were made.
Actually had a movie about kids who have seen every horror movie ever made, and that may be the end to scaring the audience. These people actually live in a world where all these horror movies have played, and they grew up with their VCRs and they're aware of all this stuff. And what do you do if you get a phone call in the middle of the night and you're in the middle of nowhere? What do you do?
Years earlier, Williamson had written a one-act play with a girl on the phone being quizzed by someone who claimed he was a killer outside the window. Williamson expanded that scene by incorporating different ideas for characters he's had in the past, officially developing a horror movie he wanted to see. Once he wrote a descriptive 22-page outline, Williamson went off to Palm Springs for 3 days to crank out his second feature script called Scary Movie, an homage and love letter to the film that turned Williamson into a horror buff.
I think the timing was so right, and that's what I was banking on when I wrote the script, and that's why I wrote it so quickly, because I thought someone else is going to come along and make a scary movie or make a teenage movie, and I'm going to have missed my chance. I saw an opportunity to really sort of take a stab. I wrote the movie really quickly so that I could get it out there as quickly as possible, and it paid off.
Williamson had admitted that he didn't have high expectations for this film. He saw it as a stepping stone to help him land more extensive projects and was desperate to get anything sold to help with his financial troubles. Also, with horror being a dying genre, Williamson feared the reception he would receive. Thankfully, he wrote the script without much action because he wanted to hook readers by making it an easy and enticing read, allowing the chosen director to get creative with a simple action line that read something like, "Girl runs through woods." After arriving home and immediately sending it to his agent, Rob Paris, it was sent off to various studios for auction. Unexpectedly, the script was receiving high praise, and by the end of that day, Williamson had gotten 4 to 5 offers from different companies wanting to buy the rights. But Williamson was eagerly waiting to see if Miramax would make an offer. During this time, Bob Weinstein had started a new sister company called Dimension Films, which would focus on genre fair pictures. At this point, they had bought the rights to Halloween and Hellraiser, director, so Williamson felt this would be a perfect home for Scary Movie. An assistant to Bob Weinstein named Richard Potter received this script from Bobby Cohen, who worked at Miramax. He said the writing wasn't for them, but it might work for Dimension Films. Potter read it and was blown away at how scared he felt from just reading the first few pages. So he called his boss and said, "Bob, I just read a script. If you don't want to make this movie, then I don't know what you're looking for." Weinstein read it and loved it. Meanwhile, studios like Paramount, Universal, and Morgan Creek had also bid on the film, so the war started and the bidding price kept increasing. Finally, the last two in the battle were Woods Entertainment and Dan Housestead and Oliver Stone. Stone is the director of movies like Platoon, Wall Street, and JFK. He wanted to make Scary Movie, but the following day, Miramax made their offer to Williamson.
The next morning, it was like 9 o'clock in the morning, we got a call from Miramax. It's saying, okay, Bob read it, he loved it, he wants to buy it. How much?
Unfortunately for them, it wasn't the highest offer they were probably hoping it would be. However, Williamson bonded with Bob over their mutual love for John Carpenter's Halloween, which made Williamson feel that Bob understood his vision the most. Williamson asked his lawyer, Patty Felker, what she thought would be the best decision. She said, "These other companies will pay you more money, Dimension will make your movie. Which one's more important to you?" Williamson accepted Dimension's offer and took his initial check of $400,000. As a side note, based on some stories from Jamie Kennedy and credits for Scream, it's my understanding that the production company, Woods Entertainment, won the bidding war but then sold it over to Dimension. Not quite sure about all the business and finance, but there you go. The next step was finding the right director to attach to the project. Miramax immediately thought of Wes Craven, who had recently done New Nightmare, which, similar to Scary Movie, blended horror and satire. Unfortunately, Craven instantly passed on the project simply because he wanted to leave the horror ghetto, as he called it. At this point, Craven was tired of only making horror and was trying to branch out to other film genres, but studios kept wanting his name to be associated with horror. It also didn't help that Vampires in Brooklyn, Craven's previous film, was a disaster, further turning him from the genre. Dimension continued to offer Craven the directing role, but he stayed firm with his decision.
I don't want to sound like I'm prissy, but there is an element to the genre that is can be said to be misogynistic, for instance, and always carving up girls. And there's a part of me that feels like, how much longer do you want to do this?
Dimension approached other candidates like George Romero, Sam Raimi, Robert Rodriguez, and Danny Boyle, but they all passed the project. According to Williamson, other lesser directors viewed the film as a comedy, making Bob Weinstein question whether it was or not. Bob asked Williamson, to which he reminded him that it's literally called a Scary Movie, and the intention is to make it horror but have moments of comedy to balance it all out. One day, the script landed in the hands of 20-year-old Drew Barrymore, who loved Scary Movie and wanted to play the role of Sidney Prescott. She became what's known as a silent producer, which meant she was rooting for the film and doing her best to get it into production. Barrymore said that every decade there is a horror movie that made a significant impact. Carpenter's Halloween in the 70s, Nightmare on Elm Street in the 80s, and she felt Scream could potentially be that for the 90s, and boy was she right. Bob Weinstein called Craven and told him Barrymore was attached, making him reconsider. It was also thanks to Lisa Harrison, who's the one that initially brought over the script to Craven on a Friday before he had any dealings with Miramax, technically giving him a shot to enter the bidding war. Still, by Monday morning it had been sold. He had instructed his assistants to read the first 10 pages of a script and, if it didn't hook them, to not bother bringing it to him. Good thing Williamson started this movie off strong, but maybe a little too strong if they wanted Craven to direct. What held Craven back was how intense the first 13 minutes were. Even though he loved it, he wasn't sure if he wanted to go to a dark place like that again and get stuck back in the genre. However, what pushed him over the edge was when a 12-year-old fan asked him when he would make a real movie again because his films were getting softer. This stuck with Craven because he realized that his scary flicks pushed the limits of horror and were ruthless. So, if Craven was going to make another influential horror film, he knew that Scary Movie would be it. Craven then called Weinstein and said if the job was still available, he would take it. To act as his director of photography, Craven hired Mark Irwin, who had previously filmed other horror films like The Dead Zone and the remakes for The Fly and The Blob. I don't have a vital source, but it seems like he met Craven when they both worked on Nightmare Cafe. After that, the two would collaborate for New Nightmare and Vampires in Brooklyn. After this film, Irwin would act as DP for movies like 10 Things I Hate About You, Osmosis Jones, and funny enough, Scary Movie 3. Irwin would use 35mm film using movie cam compact cameras and Claremont anamorphic lenses, making it Craven's first time he had ever shot in a wider aspect ratio. A basic explanation for those who don't know, an anamorphic ratio allows filmmakers to capture a wider field of view, more closely emulating what the human eye can see in real life and further enhancing the cinematic feel. I made a more in-depth video of this topic in case anyone would like to learn more about it. With Craven signed on, the project geared towards pre-production. But in one night in her New York apartment, Barrymore had a weird revelation, as she called it, and decided it would be more impactful if she played the girl from the opening scene, since it would play with the audience's expectations. Moreover, she could imagine the shock of seeing the main character get killed in the first 10 minutes of the film. So inspired by Janet Leigh in Psycho and Angie Dickinson in Dressed to Kill, Barrymore dropped out of the role for Sydney.
I just thought, God, you know what sucks about scary movies is you always know that main person's gonna make it. What if we took that out, I die and all bets are off, and then it just took off into this wonderful genre.
Producer Marian Maddalena received the news and let Craven know. Having only 5 to 6 weeks before the start of production, this was devastating news to everyone. Nobody was happy with this, and not even Craven, who almost left the project after hearing the news. He knew it was a considerable risk to play with people who would be excited to see Barrymore star in the role, and was unsure if the audience would forgive him for killing her off immediately. Luckily, he adapted to the idea and stayed on. The only person who was likely happy with the news was Williamson, who said he originally envisioned a Janet Leigh type role to create a shocking introduction. This is why he made the opening a little longer than usual to fool the audience into thinking that Casey was the lead, therefore she wouldn't get killed off right away. In fact, during the time that Barrymore was signed on to play Sidney Prescott, there were talks about having Alicia Silverstone play the role of Casey following her massive success with Clueless.
Ugh, as if.
With Barrymore dropping the role of Sidney Prescott, Craven needed to find his new final girl. He needed someone who was innocent yet had tremendous strength. Thankfully, the casting sessions were jam-packed with options because Barrymore's name was attached. Alicia Woods and Brittany Murphy were one of the many people who auditioned for the role of Sydney. Reese Witherspoon was also considered, but for whatever reason, never got to the audition phase.
It was a hard search because you had to have the actress who was vulnerable as well as being really strong, and that's a tough dichotomy to find in an actress.
Kevin Williamson's brother one day asked him, what about that girl from Party of Five? But Kevin had never seen the show. When he discovered who Neve Campbell was, he found out she had already auditioned. Kevin pulled up the tape and asked if she could come back for another round of auditions, then found out Craven also liked her. In the making of featurette, Campbell says she wasn't so sure she wanted to do another horror film after her feature debut in The Dark, where she played a police officer even though she was around 17 years old. Not only because she had already worked in that genre, but also because she's simply not a fan of it. She stated that she can't take horror at almost every convention, interview, or Q&A panel. By the way, her favorite horror film is The Changeling from 1980, since that's probably the most common question she gets.
I was 13 years old at a sleepover. It was called The Changeling with George C. Scott. It's a great movie, but didn't sleep for months.
Anyways, what encouraged Campbell's audition was not because this was a scary movie, but because Wes Craven was attached to direct, and this would be her first lead role in a film. Campbell remembers being nervous in her audition since she knew it was between her and another actor, but those feelings eased when she entered the room. Craven was engaged and in director mode rather than just sitting back and waiting to be impressed. Of course, this would make Campbell even more excited to work with him. Craven had seen her in Party of Five, and when they met, he was a little worried that she didn't know what she was in for since she was so sweet and soft, so Craven warned Campbell that the role was very demanding and would be like boot camp and going into the Marines. However, Campbell reassured Craven that thanks to her long history in training in dance, she had built that strength and stamina up and was ready to be one of the most kick-ass final girls, Sidney Prescott. Technically, Campbell was one of the last people to be cast, so at this point, they likely had a good idea of who would play the rest of the characters. But for the sake of this video, let's go down the main casting list and discuss how each actor made it to the bloody screen. With Campbell cast, next was the role of Sid's love interest, Billy Loomis, whose name is a direct reference to, you guessed it, Dr. Loomis from Halloween. According to Marianne Maddalena, the part of Billy was very hard to find. They needed someone who was simultaneously handsome and charismatic, but had that demented edge to him.
Had
do we know you're not the killer?
There was some buzz in Hollywood about a kid named Skeet Ulrich. Ulrich's audition gave the filmmakers, especially Craven, the same gut feeling they got when they initially saw Johnny Depp audition for his breakthrough role in A Nightmare on Elm Street. Casting director Lisa Beach says that Ulrich's audition is one she'll never forget. He auditioned using the scene in Sydney's bedroom. With Beach reading as Sid and Ulrich being 2 to 3 feet away from her, she knew this was the guy, essentially landing Ulrich the gig. Next up on the cast was Sydney's best friend, Tatum Riley. Williamson's agent, Rob Paris, had seen an actor named Rose McGowan at the Sundance Film Festival in a movie called The Doom Generation and thought she was incredible. With contenders like Rebecca Gayheart and Melinda Clark, the filmmakers looked through many auditions, but none of them embody the character of Riley as much as Rose McGowan. To play the role of Stu, Lisa Beach needed to find someone who was, as the script describes, almost a jock, almost handsome, and almost cool. After going through several auditions, she looked across the hall and noticed a 6'4" dude accompanying his then girlfriend to one of her auditions. Beach walked out of the audition room, looked at the boyfriend, and said,
"You look good for this part. Would you mind coming in and auditioning, please?"
Of course, it ended up being Matthew Lillard, who, funny enough, initially auditioned for Billy Loomis. He was asked to return in 3 hours and to memorize multiple pages of dialogue, but of course, he wasn't able to and improvised most of his audition. He was then offered the role of Stu on the spot, a rare thing that happened in Hollywood. And how else does Williamson's script describe the character of Stu? Well, as a Billy wannabe.
I auditioned for Skeet's part. I didn't get that shit.
Lillard felt the movie would perform well after attempting to read the script that night while staying in a friend's shack in Laurel Canyon, but he was unable to because he got too freaked out, so he had to wait to finish reading until daylight. The last one of the leading teen characters is Randy, who's described as a tall and gangly kid with no such Billy-like aspirations, a witty jokester who elevates geek to coolness. He was the most memorable since we all have that one friend who knows everything about every movie. Hell, you watching this video makes you that person right now. Casting one of the most likable characters in the script must have been a daunting task. In the end, the role went to Jamie Kennedy, who was, in my opinion, the perfect choice for Randy, especially considering he was a big Wes Craven fan. In fact, the very first VHS his family ever rented was A Nightmare on Elm Street. Because this is already a long video, I'll summarize Kennedy's story as quickly as possible. However, I highly recommend listening to Kennedy tell the whole story himself on his Hate to Break It to You podcast. Kennedy was a starving actor in Hollywood in the mid-90s, trying to find any type of entertainment work while making enough money to keep himself alive. Often he would illegally pay someone from the inside to get him the big casting breakdowns that more prominent agents and managers would receive. One day, while flipping through the pages, he finds a casting breakdown for Scary Movie and notices a role for Randy, described as the gangly fifth wheel. Kennedy immediately calls his agent and she gets him an audition. After several tryouts and meeting Wes Craven, Kennedy went on to play Samson in Romeo and Juliet. Unfortunately, he didn't hear back for a while until one day when he was asked to return for a final audition. From his knowledge, it was between him and Breckin Meyer, which is funny because they both competed for roles in Clueless. Seth Green was also up for the part, but I'm not sure if he ever made it to the audition process or was simply suggested by one of the filmmakers. Kennedy walks into a room of approximately 15 people and, to their surprise, with hot pink hair since he was filming Romeo and Juliet. It was the first thing they called out, so he thought it would cost him the audition. A week later, his agent tells him that Craven loves him, but the studio is thinking of Jason Lee, who was coming off hot from Mallrats. Another 2 weeks pass, and his agent is told that Craven wants to speak directly to Kennedy. Kennedy was nervous because he had 0 credits, so he was considered a nobody. He then went and did a collect call to call Craven. Craven asked him, "Are you ready to make a movie? You've been my pick for #1. I just can't see anyone else saying these lines. Welcome aboard." There were many concerns about casting Kennedy, but Craven kept pushing for him and gave him his break in Hollywood when the studio didn't want to. So that was great news for Kennedy and his agent, considering that she was representing Rosa McGowan, who was now confirmed to have landed the part. When Kennedy received the script, he was so mesmerized that he read all 119 pages in 40 minutes, while on an elliptical. Again, go listen to Jamie Kennedy tell all his stories. He's got some great advice and is just a really fun listen. With all the teens cast, Craven and his team needed to find someone to play Tatum's older brother and deputy of Woodsboro, Dewey Riley. Being 2 years younger than Skeet Ulrich, Matthew Lillard, and Jamie Kennedy, David Arquette was reached out to audition for one of the roles of the teenagers, more specifically Billy. But after reading the script, which he knew would work because he could read it fast despite having dyslexia, Arquette had his eyes set on Dewey, which threw the filmmakers off. Because Dewey was pictured more as a big, hunky guy, Craven asked him, "Why would you want to do that role?"
I read it, and I came in and I said, Wes, I really would rather do the role of Dewey. And he was like, Dewey? Well, why would you want to do that role? It's like, well, I didn't get to kiss Courtney Cox. And
Craven could see Arquette's passion and grew to the idea of Dewey being a little goofier, which suited David Arquette perfectly. Next up, they needed to cast Gale Weathers. Executive producer Marianne Maddalena says they offered the role to Janine Garofalo, but she passed on it. They were also very close to hiring Brooke Shields until a particular candidate decided to audition. After reading what she describes as the most exciting 30 pages of a script they've ever read, Friends and Family Ties star Courtney Cox knew she wanted to do the movie before she even got to her character. The combination of scares and humor worked in her favor.
I had never seen Courtney Cox play a role like this, and it was, I think, so nice to see her sort of playing against type, certainly against the role she plays on Friends. She ran with it.
Yeah, she really did. I think a lot of people have said how much they like her in this role and how much she's impressed them as a real actress.
Cox said she wanted to play Gale because her character was a total bitch, which was the complete opposite of Monica. You'll often see actors get their start in a horror film and then get their big breaks into mainstream media. So it was a big deal that Cox already had massive success with Friends and then pursued to be in a horror film, and she's been in every single sequel, including the most recent Scream 6, Ghostface Takes Manhattan. After convincing many people who only saw her as the intellectual or doctor type and watching other journalists to get the right infliction, Cox landed the role of Gale Weathers. And for her cameraman, Kenny, they cast W. Earl Brown, who had previously appeared in Wes Craven's New Nightmare and Vampires in Brooklyn. When Brown read the script, he noticed the fat jokes and decided to put on 20 pounds to make them land harder. Lastly, they needed to cast the voice of Ghostface before production started because Barrymore wanted to have an actor read the lines rather than the script supervisor. What made this role unique is that, unlike many masked slasher villains prior, Ghostface would be one of the few that talked. So they sent out the first scene to a casting agency, and with no direction, Roger L. Jackson would knock it out of the park. So even though you may recognize his voice as Ghostface, there's a chance that you know him best as the power-hungry Mojo Jojo.
It's more of a game, really. Can you handle that money? This doesn't work then.
The casting process would be a fun experience for the filmmakers since their original budget couldn't afford the actors that would end up auditioning. However, because Craven and Barrymore were attached, it resulted in more agencies, which led to a wide variety of auditions they could look through to find the perfect group of actors. It was also one of those movies that capitalized on the television world by allowing many TV actors the opportunity to break into the feature realm. With the cast set, the filmmakers had a significant issue they needed to solve. What is Ghostface? Sure, the script describes him as a ghost masked figure, but what will he actually look like? According to production designer Bruce Allen Miller, they had multiple people come up with potential mask designs, but nothing was clicking. Greg Nicotero and Bob Kirkman's special effects company K&B would be the lead effects team working on Scary Movie. In their first production meeting, one of the special makeup effects supervisors, Howard Berger, says that the best response he got from Craven when he took all the sketches for Ghostface was, maybe this one, I don't know. A common theme throughout the project was being at the right place at the right time, which indeed applied here. Maddalena and her team were scouting the house where they shot Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt, now owned by an older woman. The woman who owned the house was older with her kids already moved out, and her son's old bedroom was a Halloween mask that would end up scaring a new generation of audience members. Craven liked that the design resembled the famous Scream painting from 1893, so they took the mask and sent it over to Dimension Films, who also liked it. They did ask Craven to take it to his effects team and ask them to make different renditions so they could own the rights. After multiple versions were made, none of them worked for Craven as much as the one they had found. Finally, he talked with Dimension and they allowed him to use the mask he wanted. Craven enjoyed the simplicity since the script described it as a dime store Halloween mask.
The mask itself we found in a house that we were location scouting at, and it was just an off-the-shelf item that, is available in just about any dime store around Halloween time.
This mask came from a little company in North Carolina called Fun World, for which Miramax would have to get permission. It was created in 1991 as part of a Fantastic Faces pack by a woman named Bridget Slariton, who used The Scream, Pink Floyd's The Wall, and the appearance of ghostly Betty Boop characters from the 1930s to make the final design that Craven would later find and end up loving. Unfortunately, it has come to my attention that the company Fun World may not be as truthful as I initially thought. I found this thread by Chris Moliere that explains how Fun World essentially stole the design of Ghostface from sculptor Lauren Githin. Githins made a design based off a bedsheet ghost, and in the early 90s, sold that design to his special effects friend Tony Gardner, who has done amazing work for film and TV, with his first IMDb credit being a makeup effects crew member for Thriller. But you may have seen his face as one of Chucky's victims in Seed of Chucky. Anyways, Gardner started selling Githin's design as a make-your-own bedsheet ghost under Gardner's company name, the Alterian Ghost Factory. The Ghost Maker, which is what the kit was called, was marketed at a Chicago Halloween trade show in March of 1991. You know who else was here? Fun World, who had supposedly expressed interest in the Ghost Factory line, but never made any deals or any sort of agreements. Months later, the in-house designer for Fun World, Bridget Slariton Linden, received a request to design a mask based on the pictures of the Ghost Maker. Her design was then turned into a mask as part of the Fantastic Faces pack. The Fun World mask was later found by producer Marianne Maddalena, and when Craven decided that was going to be the look of Ghostface, Miramax paid Fun World for the rights. Now, every year, Fun World makes enormous profits off the Mask and Scream franchise. It gets a little worse. Not only has Fun World denied the original origin of what is now the Ghostface mask, but they've also discredited their in-house designer, Bridget Slariton Linden, and have said that the company president, Alan Geller, is the creator of the Ghostface mask. This isn't the only instance of Fun World being known to rip off other people's designs, but it's a shame to think that if any other company tries to rip off a Fun World mask, Fun World will quickly take them down. But they will unapologetically rip off the designs of smaller companies or creators. And just to be clear, the people doing wrong here are the ones on the corporate side of things, not the artists who work there. Again, massive thanks to Chris for his thread on the topic. I'm glad I was able to find it right before publishing this video. Now, let's keep talking masks. Thanks to a blog by Ryan Hills on ScreamThrilogy.com, I found out that K&B effects artist Garrett Immel made a slightly altered version of the mask where the eyes were squintier and had a more petite mouth that would thin out towards the bottom. It's an excellent read for anyone who wants to know which mask was used for what shot. In their pre-production meetings, Craven asked Williamson for more information on the overall look of the killer, questioning whether his hands and feet were visible. Williamson told Craven it wasn't his problem since he was just the writer. Initially, they started developing concept art with a white figure since the script called for a ghost mask, but producer Marianne Maddalena said, "I think black would look a lot scarier. Likely because if the killer wore black, it would be considerably easier to hide in the shadows. On top of that, I'm sure they didn't want to give off any Casper or Clan vibes." They noted how the costume would work in the film and realized it would be best if it covered the entire body. Not only to keep the identity of the killer more secret, but now anybody could play Ghostface, making it easier for stunt work. The newest slasher icon would end up wearing an all-black costume with a bit of sheen to help with lighting, all while resembling the Scream.
Underneath the mask, underneath the monster that is out there, that horrible Ghostface killer is us. And I think that is, to me, the most important thing that we all have to do as human beings is stop externalizing evil and look inside of ourselves.
With the cast set and the look of Ghostface finalized, now it's time to figure out what the look of the fictional town of Woodsboro would be. Craven knew the location of Woodsboro was critical, however, trying to keep it at a $15 million budget, Miramax didn't want Craven to have the production in California due to the high filming costs. They wanted him to film in Vancouver to save the studio roughly $1 million. Still, regardless of the city's beauty, Craven didn't feel the location was American enough. And because of the film's commentary on Hollywood and the impact media violence has on society, it was necessary for him to evoke that Woodsboro looked like an ordinary town from California. They went to scout Santa Rosa, and it felt like they had found the vibe they were looking for. Craven says it's one of the few times he took a stand, went to Bob Weinstein's office, and expressed the importance of filming in California. According to production designer Bruce Allen Miller, some higher-ups said, "That's fine. Instead of Wes Craven's Scary Movie, we'll just title it to Joe Blow's Scary Movie," suggesting that they could replace Craven with a director who would save them the $1 million.
You know? Okay, there goes a great job.
Eventually, one of the Weinsteins said, "Craven's name is worth $3 million, and so they ended up allowing him to set up their production in Santa Rosa. A temporary win for Craven because this town would end up creating more issues than expected. The filmmakers found Santa Rosa High School and loved the location's look. Supposedly, it was film friendly, and as a bonus, was one of the locations featured in Coppola's Peggy Sue Got Married. The high school's administration initially welcomed the cast and crew, but things turned for the worst when the Santa Rosa School Board stepped in and asked to read the script. Frank Pugh, a member of the city school board, says that they were told it was a spoof/comedy, but, as I quote, what they read was not. After reading the script, multiple moments such as the fountain scene with the teenagers talking about getting gutted and emptied out and the principal's foul mouth stood out. Finally, the board decided to pull the contract because they found the script despicable and didn't want to glorify violence against children.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
It also didn't help that production occurred not long after a tragedy less than 20 miles away involving Polly Klaas, a 12-year-old girl kidnapped at knife point during a slumber party and later found dead. The trial was set in motion around the time the school board read the screenplay, influencing their decision to not allow the filmmakers to make the film there. About a month after the school board drama had started, it slowly became public knowledge, leading a small group of people to jump on the bandwagon and be against the production. While at this same time, students from the high school were signing petitions to allow filming there. Even people from the local community felt the city would benefit from the income. Producer Marianne Maddalena says they had a big town hall meeting and let the people give their opinion and decide whether or not to let filming happen at the high school. There were long lines of people that night ready to speak up, with many claiming that violent media can lead to violence in real life. Director of Santa Rosa School District, Doug Bauer, says the decision wasn't based on the film's morality, but rather the educational program's disruption. They finally voted to reject Craven and his crew. He says he understands the trauma locals were dealing with, but that they were treated harshly and like scum. This is why Craven added at the end of the film, "No thanks whatsoever to the Santa Rosa City School District Governing Board." But you know, the school board members were probably wonderful people who wanted nothing more than peace and love for the community and their loved ones.
One of the great ironies of it was that in the middle of all this school board saying you're showing the wrong thing to our kids and setting the wrong example, one of them was arrested for beating his wife, which I thought was a wonderful ironic touch.
Well, that's awkward. Their location issue was solved when they were invited to shoot their film in the neighboring town of Sonoma, California. They filmed at a community center that used to be an old school. It also didn't fall in the jurisdiction of any of the school boards, so they could simply pay to use it and not need any further permission. So they put up the sign on the building, added some lockers in the hallway, and bam, Woodsboro High School was born. The following location they needed was the home of Dewey and Tatum Riley. They chose a lovely home in McDonald Avenue, which not only appeared in Hitchcock's 1943 thriller Shadow of a Doubt, but was also the exact location where they found the Ghostface mask. Talk about fate. And across the street from the Riley house was Pollyanna's house from the 1960 family film. So yeah, McDonald Avenue seems to be a famous street for location scouts. Production started on April 15th, 1996, with the first 5 days being the opening sequence with Drew Barrymore, which would be filmed on a newly built house. This also meant that even though Barrymore only worked for the week, it took 5 days to create an opening sequence that would completely change the trajectory of the horror genre. Despite all the issues leading up to production, Craven still had to prove his vision to the studio. While filming the news footage of Cotton Weary, Williamson was sitting behind Craven when he answered a call and noticed him start to slump his back and slide down the chair in distress. It was a call from Dimension. As dailies came in, the studio was worried the film wouldn't be scary and noticed the heavy use of Steadicam, so they sent Craven dailies from Night Watch and asked him to make it look more like that. Bob Weinstein also thought the Ghostface mask they went with wasn't scary. With their confidence in Craven declining again, there were worries about the horror director being fired. The tension kept rising, and according to multiple people there, the studio was making Craven feel bad for the quality he was delivering, even though they were simply watching raw individual takes, not an edited scene. To them, the footage felt unexciting with the mask they didn't find scary. Williamson would say, "It's not what a director needs to hear when he's shooting a movie. It just broke him." Producer Kathy Conrad would even start getting calls from executives who wanted to ensure that something was changing early in the morning. Eventually, word got out and the entire crew knew that Bob hated what they were filming. He even went as far as to describe the footage as workmanlike at best, completely dismissing the hard work and long hours the crew was putting in. One night, Conrad received a call late at night and answered. Wes Craven had called to ask the producers to go to his hotel room, where they met with Dimension executive Cary Granat. He wanted them to refilm what they had shot using several different masks so that Bob Weinstein could decide which was best. But of course, nobody, especially not Craven, would ever want to do that. So instead, they offered a different solution. Edit what they had so that Bob could see what it's like to watch the footage with tension rather than watching raw takes. With Dimension giving them a short time to deliver this, the filmmakers knew they needed to rapidly cut the opening together and prove to Weinstein that the film and the look of Ghostface would work. Editor Patrick Lussier had been a frequent collaborator with Craven after editing an episode of Nightmare Cafe that Craven directed. The two would work together until Red Eye, which was released in 2005. Lussier would go on to direct features like the 3 Dracula 2000 films and the My Bloody Valentine remake. He's also co-written major films like Terminator Genisys. Anyways, Lussier quickly made the cut, sent it to Wes on a VHS tape, made one music note, then sent the film work print over to New York. When Bob Weinstein and the people of Dimension Films watched the rough cut, they regained complete confidence in Craven and admitted they were wrong in having doubts since it was clear the film was working. I guess they didn't understand that a director is hired because you're paying them to tell the story from their point of view. Craven was a great filmmaker because he knew what he needed to tell the story his way, even if it wasn't evident to anyone who was just looking at the individual takes. Whether he was staying on sticks to get composed shots or moving fast on a Steadicam, he had a clear vision. The studio made up for this hassle by providing a little extra money to ensure they could get a real orchestra for the score, probably the least they could do after the harsh, unfair criticisms they threw at Craven. But even with the extra money, Marco Beltrami would have to stretch his budget for the score. You see, music is one of the last things made before a movie is released, meaning that most of the time, there's not much wiggle room to get extra funds. Beltrami says there were too many things he wanted to do, including some electronic stuff, but they were too tight on money. For example, while recording Sydney's theme, he tried to use string harmonics, but couldn't get access to them. So instead, he asked the string players to whistle, but not enough of them did. So Beltrami stopped conducting and went into the recording booth to ask Craven if he knew how to whistle. This led to Craven and the producers standing with the string section and whistling Sydney's theme. So next time you hear that track, picture Craven and friends whistling in the back of an orchestra. Production continued as planned over 8 weeks between April and June of 1996. Midway through the shoot, the studio took it upon itself to make a change that would alter the course of film history.
The original title of Scream was Scary Movie, and we all loved it. And then we heard that Bob wanted to call it Scream.
After listening to this 1995 hit single by Michael and Janet Jackson, the two Weinstein brothers made it a mandate to scrap the title Scary Movie and rename it to Scream. When the news broke to the filmmakers on set, they were outraged and found it to be a stupid title. Because of the change, they even added this line to the film.
It's a scream, baby! He said it! He said it!
They started production with hats that said Scary Movie and ended it with shirts that said Scream. Thankfully, the filmmakers grew to love and cherish the new title.
That was one of the places where Bob prevailed, thank God.
And it all worked out because 4 years later, Dimension Films would reuse that title when the Wayans brothers decided to parody the film parodying horror films.
Yo. What's up?
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Back to production, the cast and crew would go on to create a summer camp type bond because of the long days and all of its sweat, stress, and screams, especially when it came down to the film's final sequence. Scene 118 was the last scene they needed to film before wrapping up production. The only issue is that these were the final 41 pages of the script, which meant there would be 21 days of cold, overnight shoots at an isolated farmhouse at the top of a hill. To describe the scene on the call sheet, first assistant director, Nicholas Mastandrea, wrote, "People live, people die." Afterward, they would head back to their blacked out rooms at a DoubleTree in the middle of the countryside, where the main cast would drink in David Arquette's hotel room since Arquette had set up a full bar there. Which is funny imagery since Arquette describes having bought multiple blacklight posters and lava lamps to get those funky vibes.
David is nuts, so he bought every toy possible that you can buy in Santa Rosa, and they were hanging from his ceiling. It was called, I think it was called David's Bar or David's Club or something. It's called David.
Sometimes they'd eat a little dessert, if you catch my drift, and go ride go-karts in their spare time. They would all hang out from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then sleep to arrive on set by 6 p.m. Rose McGowan recalled when she and Arquette were bored and realized it was prom night for the locals, so they started following the limos and would crash prom parties, claiming, "Hey, this is what we can do. I can't find a gay club. Let me try this." Lillard added that they would all hang out every weekend, with Ulrich and him sometimes going golfing. It was absolutely like their own summer camp, especially since they were filming outside Los Angeles. One time, the cast were all talking about what they would do next. Courtney would do Friends and Neve would do Party of Five. Lillard was excited to go do a TV pilot and thought that would be his big break, but the pilot never got picked up and his big break ended up being Scream. He says it shows that the things you least expect are always the most special.
Like all the things you think in your life are going to lead to something incredible, I find that usually doesn't. It's the thing you don't expect to be amazing that becomes amazing. These cons, for me, was an opportunity to come out and make money in between jobs.
Because of all the blood in the final few minutes, the remaining cast had to wear the same clothing covered in red corn syrup for entire days. They all expressed how uncomfortable that was and the strange looks they would get when they would arrive back at their hotel and run into the tourists who were in the lobby for breakfast. Lillard even recalled a memory that stuck with him of Campbell, Ulrich, and himself in the living room playing with the fake blood in between setups and being utterly spaced out from exhaustion.
So I have a very distinct memory in my life of Neve and Skeet and I sitting in the living room, each one of us playing with the blood on our hands at like 4 a.m, coming down off of this like adrenaline rush and sort of like just zoning out, being tired.
Or from a hangover, as Campbell said.
I mean, there were no iPhones, there's no.
It's called a hangover, Matt.
Can't blame them because, let's not forget, it's not like they could just scroll endlessly through social media. After a grueling shoot, Scene 118 wrapped on June 8th, 1996, officially ending production on Scary Movie, or what it's now called, Scream. After getting their t-shirts that said, "I survived Scene 118, the cast and crew took their group picture and went their separate ways. Lillard remembers that after they wrapped, Campbell, Kennedy, and him hopped in a car, drove down south, and as the morning sun shined, they listened to Oasis, then hung out in San Francisco for the weekend. With the film entering post-production, Craven would run into his biggest enemy and a final obstacle to getting this movie done: the MPAA. After turning in the film's first cut, Scream received an NC-17 rating. Trying to get the R rating, Craven cut out a handful of frames of gore and then returned it for another review. And how did that go? Well, NC-17. The MPAA's first request was to cut out Steve's death because, as they said, it's just too intense. So Craven left it in, but was forced to nearly cut out all the gore, which would have shown the steamy guts spill out onto the floor. They also requested to remove any bloody sound effects and smoke from a gun. So that's it, right? Craven killed one of his darlings, so he should get the R rating.
Wrong!
Well, the film came back and it was still an NC-17. Craven refused to cut anything from the film, but the mentioned films refused to gamble on releasing a movie with this rating since it would limit the number of people who would be able to go buy a ticket. So once again, we have another Craven versus Weinstein battle. The December release date was approaching and they still couldn't get the rating they wanted. Unfortunately, they were also running out of budget, and yes, every time the MPAA reviewed a version of the movie, the studio would have to pay for it. At this point, Craven was frustrated to see fantastic effects gone to waste on the cutting room floor, but knew he had no choice. As a result, multiple scenes were cut or heavily trimmed down. The first big one is the shot of Casey's body hanging, which made the MPAA go berserk, as Craven stated in the film's commentary. After rounds of trimming, they ended up just cutting every other frame to speed it up by half.
Really shorten it much more than I would have cared to.
Next was the wide shot of Casey getting stabbed in her chest. They wanted Craven to go back and reshoot it to avoid seeing the impact, but he lied and told him that Drew was so wrought up over it, so that was the only footage they could use. Unfortunately, there would be a trade-off. If you have to see stabbings in the opening, you wouldn't be able to see stabbings in the end, but we'll get to that in a bit. Casey getting stabbed in the heart area was essential to Craven because it's a significant moment of intensity in this long shot. He wanted audiences to be shocked at this moment because the idea is that you see her boyfriend die, but surely they won't kill lead star Drew Barrymore. This is why he plays with the audience by having her get back up only to get ignored. Next was when Kenny's throat was slashed. Again, the MPAA removed a few seconds of his reaction because they found it too disturbing.
And it had to be trimmed, and Wes's argument was, it's murder, it should be disturbing.
Craven was upset because he said it was an example of where censorship can make something more impersonal. We were supposed to see Kenny's reaction to Ghostface because it's human. It's a deeply personal thing for someone to look at their killer as they're dying. Finally, the biggest one that earned them the NC-17 rating was the entire ending, especially with Billy and Stu. The first note Craven received when he initially sent the movie was, "It's a wonderful film, completely compelling, and a wonderful example of an NC-17. The MPAA found Billy and Stu stabbing each other as too much and wanted it cut entirely. Craven initially started by cutting out any shots that showed their hands dripping with blood, but it wasn't enough. Then they cut out any images where you could see the fake stabbings, still not enough. Finally, with the release date quickly approaching and Craven refusing to delete this scene, Bob Weinstein called the association and said, "Please watch it again to understand the context of how this is happening, that there is an element of humor in it." Not only was Craven surprised by Weinstein's gesture, but once the MPAA was told that the film was a comedy satire, they finally gave them the R rating. In an interview with Richard Potter, he said the MPAA was never that specific with what was okay and what wasn't. To quote him, "There are movies that are bloodier and gorier than that original cut of Scream that will get a lower rating because they see the artistic value in it. I've always said that the difference between a horror movie and a thriller is whether or not the person you're talking to liked it. If they liked it, it's a thriller. If they didn't like it, it was horror." Which I've gotta say, he's absolutely right. Just think of movies like Silence of the Lambs, Seven, and Get Out, which are often labeled as pure thrillers, or sometimes even comedies, even though they're clearly horror films. Editor Patrick Lussier says that it took them 9 re-edits to get to the final version, and each time they would send it off to the MPAA to screen, it would take up to 2 weeks to watch the film. Craven expected this and joked on set saying that none of the significant effects would make it in, but if it did, it would make $1 bajillion.
It's very difficult now making a film of this sort where you're really going into the dark side of humanity, because the MPAA sort of looks at every film as, I don't know what, sort of propaganda for the good life, and if you go really into the dark side of the way human beings often are, they get very upset and say, well, this is going to push some kid over the edge, which I don't believe. I really found the audiences respond to truth in films.
With the film gearing for its nationwide release, the filmmakers finally made it past all those obstacles thrown at them and neared the finish line. In the one and only test screening, the feedback and test scores were through the roof, which didn't surprise Craven since he knew during production that what they were filming was special. David Arquette was working a newsstand in Melrose when he noticed that there was going to be a test screening for the film. And before you ask, just because you're an actor or known creative, it doesn't mean that's your only job, especially since sometimes it can be a while until your next gig. But after being told he wasn't supposed to be there, they let him watch the movie from the back, where Arquette got to see Craven watch the film. He described Craven to have been smirking as the scares approached. The audience would scream and then start laughing, making Craven chuckle too. That sounds like a movie name. The audience would scream and then start laughing, making Craven chuckle. nothing could stop their excitement for the world's reception to the film. Well, nothing except the popular entertainment publication that would predict Scream to be dead on arrival before it was released. They probably claimed this because the film was set to come out 5 days before Christmas, which worried Craven. But Bob Weinstein told him that horror fans are deprived at this time of year, so it would be a good option. The film was released on December 20th, 1996, and made $6.4 million for its opening weekend, less than half of its $15 million budget, and landing number 4 as far as box office numbers that week. Producer Marie Maddalena went to a theater and heard large crowds erupt with laughter in the auditorium where Beavis and Butthead Do America was playing. Then checked out the audience for Scream and only saw around 7 people quietly watching the film. The reviews were coming in and they were not looking good. Some called Craven a washed-up director, and many critics called it a failed attempt to make fun of the horror genre. Even Variety wrote, "Scream is an interesting stab at altering the shape of horror, but it's one experiment that needed more lab time before venturing into the marketplace." At this point, the filmmakers started the process of accepting their movie as a failure. After all the hell they went through, it was clear to them that this just wasn't it. But something interesting happened. The film made another $6.4 million the following weekend. Former Dimension Films executive Richard Potter said this was a big deal. Miramax had never seen exit polls quite like this. On the third weekend, the film made $10 million. With each week, word of mouth helped the movie gain attention from more film critics who would end up praising the film. With positive reviews, people were going out to see what the hype was about. Scream would end up playing in theaters for 31 weeks, making $103 million, nearly 7 times its budget, and earning the title for the highest grossing horror film for 1996. It also won Best Film at the 1997 MTV Movie Awards.
And the best movie is...
I'd like to thank everybody of the MTV generation who finally gave some recognition to the kind of films that we all like to go see. Really, it was a fun picture to make. You couldn't have had a nicer group of people make such a scary film, so thank you very much.
Clearly, Craven, Williamson, and the entire cast and crew had done their job correctly and had a hit on their hands. And we all know that these days,
You gotta have a sequel!
Kevin Williamson, being the clever guy he is, included a 5-page treatment for Scary Movie 2 before selling the first film. Bob Weinstein remembers reading this and greenlit the project to be released a little less than a year after the release of the first film. This sequel Jinkies. This sequel stayed close to the treatment and followed Sydney 2 years after the Scream events, with Randy and her attending college when a new Ghostface starts to kill again. The production was moving so fast that while Craven and Williamson were recording the picture's commentary, crew members were scouting locations to move the production forward while Williamson was on page 75 of the script. All this during the first film's theatrical run. They even had Sarah Michelle Gellar sign on to be in the sequel, even though she hadn't even read the script at that point.
And I love the horror genre, and I love the comedy, and I love Kevin's writing, and I really would love to work with Wes, that I signed on without reading it, which is something I've never done.
But this isn't a video about Scream 2. And you know, it feels like I'm done talking about Scream, but wrong. This is Final Picture. The goal for this is to give you movie nerds every single bit of knowledge you can so that next time you're at a horror movie trivia game, you'll be ready. So let's take a deeper dive into the story structure and see what we can learn there. Then let's see what other obscure facts exist. Hey, hold on. I just remembered the second factor of what'll make a great video essay. Number 2, make a big claim to catch the viewer's attention, but feel free to avoid making a good and thoughtful response to said claim. Extra points if you can bring in your own overanalyzed opinion as fact. And remember, be a little pretentious and use big words. So, what made Scream an absolute marvelous, preeminent, and script that had 0 flaws? Well, let's take a deep dive right into that and oh my gosh!
Fucking idiot.
Oh yeah! To think I watched the entire movie on tape. Having this up here. Good thing I feel like watching it a second time in a row. Get the camera! Get the camera! The movie starts with this ultra 90s title animation, and what would end up being Williamson's homage to the opening of When a Stranger Calls would turn into one of the most famous openings to any horror film. We're transported into the ordinary world by cutting straight into the movie's most prominent plot device, a cellular phone. In fact, Drew Barrymore would use an actual cell phone to talk with Roger Jackson, who was actually on the other side of the phone. Jackson's first few days had him outside in the rain while he would peek in through a window to see her performance. Then quickly in that first week, they put him in another room where he had his own monitor feed to see what was being captured. This helped sell the illusion that there is a killer on the other end of the call, for both Barrymore and Campbell. On top of that, Craven arranged it so that even though Jackson would be on set, he would never meet the actors. This continued throughout most of the sequels, and finally in 2015, Jackson met Campbell and Ulrich for the first time at Monster Mania.
I met Roger yesterday.
Me too.
And that was Wes Craven's brilliance, is that he did not allow us to meet during any of the shoot so that we would have this relationship.
And to push it even further, Craven would ask Jackson to improvise lines that weren't in the script to try to creep out the actors. Because Barrymore and Jackson were using real phones, at around 3 a.m. they received a call from the sheriff's department who asked who they were. It also didn't help that Barrymore would accidentally call 911 multiple times throughout the night before a crew member unplugged the phone.
I think about 3 in the morning we got a call from the sheriff's department demanding that we say who we were because they thought there was an actual killer tormenting somebody.
So props to Jackson, who found his voice by studying this scene and realizing it was a game of cat and mouse. And for Ghostface to achieve his goal, he needed to keep Casey hooked and on the phone, which is why he starts off with a calm, sexy voice.
Wait, don't hang up.
What?
I want to talk to you for a second.
And then can go as berserk as he wants.
Listen, asshole!
No, you listen, you little bitch. You hang up on me again, I'll gut you like a fish, understand?
He even genuinely scared Heather Graham to the point where she asked who was on the phone while filming the stab scenes for Scream 2, which, by the way, was directed by Robert Rodriguez.
You know, it's very hard to find sometimes people to play evil because they don't want to go quite that far into their dark side, but Roger really was able to get there really wonderfully and puts a great tone on the whole movie.
They had planned to have him dub his voiceover later in post, but they ended up loving what was recorded on set since he was actually talking with the actors and had already created a natural flow. In this opening sequence, we're quickly introduced to multiple themes that Craven was establishing, for example, starting with us seeing Casey making popcorn, which triggers a clock so that when the scene begins to get tense, the popcorn will be the alarm that warns the audience that shit's about to go down. Next, Casey pulls out a knife while talking to the killer, not realizing that she'll need that in a bit. The house established the big windows that protected Casey, which Ghostface would later break, meaning that Casey is no longer safe. It also lets the audience know that there are no nearby neighbors. As the script describes it, a big country home with a huge sprawling lawn full of big oak trees, it sits alone with no neighbors in sight. Craven used the blue light from the TV screen as a thematic device since, especially at that time, the color blue was associated with a positive feeling of getting ready or wrapping up a movie at home. This could be why this film has a lot of saturated blue backlight. He turned what people associated with happiness and made it scary. Nowadays, I guess the blue screen would be considered nostalgic and eerie, with it likely appearing in those liminal space videos. Back to the scene, Casey starts giving her opinions on horror movies and throws its own director a bit under the bus.
Freddy Krueger.
Freddy, that's right. I like that movie. It was scary.
Wow, well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
Wes Craven almost asked to remove these self-referential lines in the opening scene because he didn't want to look like an egomaniac since he was directing the film. Still, Williamson jokingly said he couldn't be an egomaniac because he made the 6th sequel, which Williamson said was included in the films that sucked. To Williamson, the Elm Street line was basically the moment that let the audience know that this film is taking place in the real world, where all the characters know these film and actors exist. It's the point where the film becomes meta, a significant element of the franchise. Another reason why the Elm Street line also works is not only because of the movie's meta themes, but the average person watching this film is likely not a big cinephile. So the reference to Elm Street, which was pretty mainstream horror, may make the casual casual viewer feel like they could be in Drew Barrymore's position. The film's theme is cemented after things get real and Ghostface asks Casey the first trivia question, which has a great music cue from Halloween because now we know that the horror genre will play a big part in the story. However, one of my favorite things about this scene is that when Casey answers the trivia questions, Ghostface messes with her by asking who the killer in Friday the 13th is. Williamson intended to stump not just Casey, but nearly anyone who's watched a Jason film and has seen one of its 8 sequels during that time. It also makes you realize that this killer knows exactly what he's doing, which makes him much more frightening.
I've always thought that the scariest killers are the killers that are really smart. And this one, like, gets you on your SATs.
Once Casey fails to remember the sweet Mrs. Voorhees, we're shown the MPAA's first major issue with the film, Steve's death. I already explained the entire censorship issue, but what's probably more fascinating is that the actor playing Steve is Kevin Patrick Walls, who was one of the last contenders for the role of Billy Loomis, and ended up getting this role as a tribute. This means that Billy basically killed himself from another universe. Like, imagine seeing Ulrich in this role. This opening is essentially the alternate version of what the film could have been if Barrymore played Sid and Ulrich never auditioned. Also, let's quickly talk about Barrymore's look here since it's a reasonably popular Scream costume. Being the fool I am, I thought this was Barrymore's natural hair, but I found out it was a wig she had made specifically for this film. She was inspired by Michelle Pfeiffer's look in Scarface, so she printed an image of her and told her wig maker, "I want this exactly this." And to this day, she still owns the wig. But anyways, Casey loses, bringing her to this level of terror with this top-notch performance from Drew Barrymore. For Craven to create this sort of fear and desperation from Casey, there had to be a conversation between the two that would gain immense trust from each other. In their talk, Barrymore told Craven about a newspaper article where a dog was burned by its owner, then set on fire. Barrymore, a massive animal lover, started crying every time she tried to talk about it. So once on set, when the cameras were up and ready and Craven needed that little bit to slightly push her over the edge, he would say, "Drew, I'm lighting the lighter."
Don't do this, I can't, I won't.
The two developed a great relationship to the point where she would also share about her inner demons and would be open with him when she couldn't film anymore because she was dry on tears. Roger Jackson recalls that Craven would comfort Barrymore after every take since she would have to go to a deep and dark place to reach that level of genuine fear when they called action. When Barrymore looks back at her experience with the film, she says it was incredibly cathartic in many ways. While on set, the first AD, Nicholas Mastandrea, would have to get onto people who would laugh and giggle while Barrymore and Craven would work to get her to that dark spot.
You just hear Drew like screaming and howling, and I'd be like, what the fuck is going on in there? And it was Wes amping her up.
Craven shows off his dexterous level of direction with this intro. He chose to use a majority of Steadicam shots in this opening because he wanted the scene to feel fluid to give off the nothing's locked down anymore type feeling. He also teases the audience by subverting expectations and having Casey back up while moving the camera in a way that would lead audiences to expect a jump scare when in reality nothing happens. Or kicking off the mystery aspect of the film by having Casey successfully remove the mask but giving us no information since it's possible she may not even comprehend what's going on anymore, considering the massive blood loss.
Get in the car. Drive down to the Mackenzies.
Oh hey, look at that! The first of many Halloween references we'll see in this film.
I want to go down the street to the Mackenzie's house.
Whether it was accidental or a nod, Casey is dragged by Ghostface in a similar way as this shot from Francis Ford Coppola's first horror film, Dementia 13, which I remember watching as a kid and being one of the trippiest things I had ever seen. That and The Nightwalker were responsible for some of my most memorable nightmares as a youngling. What I find to be the scariest aspect of this sequence, and possibly the entire franchise, is the horrifying idea that because Casey is still holding the phone, when the parents try to call the police, they're unable to because they're hearing their own child gasping for air. This device keeps the last little bit of connection between parents and daughter, again, a real testament to Williamson's ability to take something new at the time and part of everyone's lives, then make it scary.
It was pretty new, I think, and it's so much a part of our lives. That's one of the things this film did again, was take things that are parts of our lives that hadn't been used yet in a film and say, here's a phone that can put a man anywhere, right outside your window, but whether he's out front or out back, you don't know, and he can be moving.
For this reason, the use of caller ID tripled after the release of this film, since many felt that Casey would have survived had she had it and avoided answering the phone. However, I still think Ghostface would have found a way around it, considering he's a pretty smart dude. So just like how Jaws made people scared to go in the water, Scream made people scared to answer their phones, which is maybe why millennials are much more likely to have phone call anxiety than baby boomers. The sequence ends with the dummy of Casey hanging on the tree, created by the special effects team. They did what's called a live cast of Drew Barrymore, which allowed them to get a detailed portrait of her face to sell the effect that it's her body. This allowed Craven to not only grab this wide shot of her, but to ensure that in no way would Barrymore's life be risked, since there was no need for her to attach to a harness and get near the noose. After an incredible display of special effects work with Casey hanging from the tree, we cut to the setup of our new protagonist, Sidney Prescott, typing what seems to be an essay, or maybe she's getting a head start on that book of hers from Scream 4. While in the zone, she hears a strange noise outside. After what we just saw with Casey, we're led to believe that she's the next victim, only to have Billy Loomis pop out and scare her in a similar way that Glenn startled Nancy 12 years prior. When Sid's dad, Neil Prescott, tries to check in on Sidney, the door gets jammed with the closet door, as Williamson wrote in the script. This was inspired by the house Williamson grew up in. His bedroom had that thing where if you open the closet door and someone opens the bedroom door, they would clash with each other and get jammed, which he rightfully thought would be a great way at stopping Ghostface's first attempt to take Sid down. During the location scout, the filmmakers searched all of Northern California and couldn't find a room with these descriptions, so they ended up building a whole wall in Sidney's room just to add a closet built like that. After Neil reminds Sid he's leaving for an expo and staying at the Hilton, he goes to bed and leaves her alone with Tony the Tiger. Once Billy lets her know how the exorcist got him going, we're introduced to the B plot of the story, with Billy feeling sexually unfulfilled just because Sid isn't going all the way. Like, damn dude, have you ever heard about abstinence?
What if I want to have sex before I get married?
Well, I guess you just have to be prepared to die.
Many people have pointed out that Billy looks a lot like Johnny Depp, and they think Craven did it on purpose since Depp's feature debut was in A Nightmare on Elm Street. Craven has said this wasn't the case at all. Yes, he was impressed with Ulrich in a similar way he was with Depp, but Craven described Skeet Ulrich as his own man and is even quoted to say, "He didn't even remind me of Johnny that much." I totally buy it to be more of a coincidence, especially after seeing his screen test. We know Kevin Patrick Waz was up for the same role and he didn't look like Depp, so chances are that the similarities come from physical appearances. Still, as far as their personality and acting, Ulrich plays a much more stern character while Depp plays this goofier, friendly kid who also had a lot more fashion sense than Billy. In Sid's bedroom, things start to get a bit PG-13 with some awkward kissing between Sid and Billy to establish Sid as the virgin final girl. Meanwhile, a cover of Don't Fear the Reaper starts playing, acting as another reference to Halloween and potentially Ghostface since his costume is technically called Father Death. Finally, the scene ends with Sid kicking Billy out, only to flash him before leaving. According to Craven, when he watched the film with an audience, he heard a bunch of young men groan when they didn't show any nudity, a decision Williamson was glad Craven made since it didn't follow the trope of having unnecessary nakedness in horror films. We cut to the following morning with news reporters standing outside Woodsboro High School announcing the death of the two teenagers. This is when we're introduced to Gail Weathers reporting near the entrance. To get this establishing at the school, the cameraman was on a crane operating a Steadicam, then stepped off once it landed to continue to follow Sid walking on campus. In the background of this shot, we can see a news reporter talking about the occult nature of the school. This is a little Easter egg for the big horror freaks, since that news reporter is played by Linda Blair, the actor that played Reagan in The Exorcist, which Billy was just talking about in the previous scene.
The Exorcist was on.
Tatum Riley, Sid's best friend, catches her up and we find out Casey sat next to Sid in class, which is possibly Ghostface's way of messing with Sidney by sparking that fear and dread inside her. Something Craven mentions in the commentary is that many actors dyed their hair for this film so that more people stood out, one of those actors being Rose McGowan, who went from brunette to blonde to help visually separate her from Sid. After getting called in to talk with the police, we meet the kind of creepy Principal Himbry, Sheriff Burke, and my favorite character, Deputy Dewey Riley, Tatum's older brother. Principal Hembry is played by Henry Winkler, who at this point was most famous for playing the Fonz in Happy Days, but you may know him from his more recent roles in Parks and Rec, Barry, or Arrested Development. Craven and Winkler were represented by the same agent, which is likely how they got in contact with each other. Craven was surprised when Winkler said he wanted to be in the film, then comments on the character's weird behavior.
He's just about over the edge here on touching a bit too much. Even the sheriff sort of gives him a look here, which the actors just instinctively went to. It was really great.
But you can't have Winkler without some sort of reference to Happy Days, so of course, the Fonz's jacket can be seen in Hembry's closet. Also, Sheriff Burke is played by Joseph Whipp, who appeared in Nightmare on Elm Street as the sergeant who noticed Nancy was in danger. Craven's backstory for him is that he was so upset from the events in Elm Street that he moved to a small town in Northern California.
Everything is gonna be all right!
Outside of school, we get this great Scooby Gang / Friends shot with all the central teenagers hanging out at the fountain, which is Ulrich's favorite scene since that's where he felt they all found their groove. Again, Williamson does a great job quickly establishing traits from each character here, with Billy being the suave, cool guy, Sid is an intelligent but kinda quiet girl, Stu is a loudmouth, weirdly wearing similar-ish clothes as Billy and Casey, Tatum is spunky but an excellent friend to Sid, and Randy is totally the fifth wheel and comedic cinephile. The fountain scene was important for Williamson because it also established that Stu had dated Casey Becker, which immediately makes you suspect him as the killer and then adds up when you later find out why they killed Casey. For those who really want the details, notice how Billy and Stu are the only ones wearing black boots. Wait a minute, look at Randy's shoes. They're really cool. They give me some classy Grinch vibes. There's also this bit of foreshadowing with Stu answering Sydney's question of how someone could gut another person.
You take a knife and you slit him from groin to sternum. Hey, it's called tact, you fuck rag.
While filming this scene, Craven felt satisfied with the first take where Randy delivered his line in a normal voice. Still, Jamie Kennedy asked him if he could have another variation for himself, a request that Craven had never received at this point. It resulted in Kennedy doing a Jerry Lewis imitation that made it to the final cut.
Yeah, they say breakfast is the most important meal you can eat in the morning, but I don't eat breakfast. What?
Craven reassured Kennedy that he should never be afraid to ask any director for another take, which I'm very glad he did, because this is hilarious.
Did you really put her liver in the mailbox? Because I heard that they found her liver in the mailbox next to her spleen and her pancreas.
We smash cut to the bus dropping Sid off and cautiously checking her mailbox, a nod to what Randy had said at the fountain. Sid enters through the back using a glass door, which acts as an omen since it'll subconsciously remind us of Casey's home. Another thing that I'll only point out because Craven did in the commentary, but as Sydney walks up the stairs, we see a boom shadow that made it in the cut.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
We follow Sydney down her stairs where she checks her closet and then makes her way to the living room. Some may find it pointless, but it's an example of Craven's expert directing to keep the audience off balance. He tricks you into thinking Ghostface is going to jump out by lowering the music, so when he doesn't, the audience will start to get nervous and remove the closet as a potential threat so that when Ghostface next appears, it'll be a true jump scare. While watching TV, we get a quick cameo from casting director Lisa Beach as a news reporter before finding out through Gail's report that Sydney's mother was raped and murdered less than a year ago. This is a crucial piece of information as it officially sets up the development of Sid by having the audience sympathize with her as we follow her readjusting her reality based on what other characters tell her and setting up the end reveal. At this point in the script, Williamson has established the present and past, hoping that audience members would stay to discover what happens in the future. After falling asleep on the couch, Sid wakes up to a call from Tatum, letting her know she's on her way to pick her up, and their hopes of seeing Tom Cruise is, you know.
Here comes the line that I get harassed about more than any other line in the movie.
The Tom Cruise line?
Yeah.
You know, if you pause it just right, you can see his penis.
Whatever, just hurry, okay?
So I looked into it because research, and it turns out that you technically see the penis they're talking about in all the right moves. It's the scene where Tom Cruise makes love to Leah Thompson, who played Lorraine in Back to the Future. It's very quick, but Tatum's right. Pause it at the right moment, and you'll never see Cruise the same way again. The catalyst in the story is introduced when she gets a call from a familiar voice.
Tatum, just get in the car.
Hello, Sydney.
This leads us to another meta scene where she explains her issues with horror films.
What's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
This is ironic because as Sid talks about stupid characters in horror, she walks out her porch and taunts Ghostface, who claims he's got eyes on her. We then get a few payoffs when Ghostface jumps out of the closet, attacking Sydney and forcing her to go upstairs when she should be going out the back door. Good thing plot devices exist because she uses her closet door to jam Ghostface out. Craven says there was always a fine line in staging scenes with Ghostface because they needed to make him scary, but he couldn't look too silly when he got hit or smashed with a door. In fact, they had a shot where Ghostface was hit on the head with some decor and fell down the stairs, but they took it off because it looked too much like a clown. Our final little payoff for this scene is that Sid uses her computer, as established in her introduction, to call the police. Here, we were initially supposed to see her type 34 Elm Street as her address, but Craven cut it out for time. So imagine that, a Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream crossover. My inner fanboy would love to see Krueger going against the kids of Woodsboro, maybe even Dream Warrior style. Ghostface leaves and coincidentally, Billy sneaks in through Sid's window only to drop a phone. Man, this really doesn't look good for you, William. Sid gets away from him and runs right into one of the funniest moments in the film, which was totally improvised by David Arquette. After one or two takes of doing this, Craven gave him the direction, scream as loud as she does. Billy is arrested, Sid is taken to safety, and Gail arrives a few minutes late, missing her chance to interview anyone. However, this allowed Williamson to show Gail's true colors in one line when she says,
Kenny?
Yeah?
I know that you're about 50 pounds overweight, but when I say hurry, please interpret that as move your fat tub of lard ass now!
At the police station, Billy is interrogated and then locked up. Williamson's goal here was to subvert expectations by making it so apparent that Billy did it to the point where audiences would overthink it and not believe it was him. This scene also gives us a sneak peek at Dewey's desk, which the art department filled with decorations a 16-year-old would have, including a hat that, according to Craven, said Boob Patrol and had 2 large breasts. Dewey reveals to Sheriff Burke that the Ghostface costume is sold in almost every store. We see it's called Father Death, a misdirection Craven planned to hint to the audience that maybe it's Sydney's father, who has completely disappeared in the story. Dewey also reveals that her dad's name wasn't found at the hotel he said he was staying at. Sounds like a classic red herring to me. Outside the police station, we see Gail waiting for her chance to interview someone, and in the background, we see what seems to be the townspeople. Well, fun fact, none of those people are extras. On the day of filming, Craven noticed multiple people crowding behind the police barricade, trying to get a look at production. Seeing how they were already there, he used this to his advantage and filmed them as spectators, automatically increasing his
production value!
We follow Sydney, Tatum, and Dewey outside where they run into Gail. After some evident resentment, Sid punches Gail in the face, which is one of Courtney Cox's favorite franchise moments.
My agent told me that the moment when I did this in the script, that's when he knew the script would sell. I don't know what he meant by that, but that's
Courtney had a great time with that. She loved getting punched.
The next scene shows Sid hanging out with Tatum, where we see how girly and retro her room is. It's subtle, but the work of production designer Bruce Miller and his art team went a long way toward giving insight into who these characters are. Sid loves folk rock and art, Dewey is a goofy kid, and Tatum is tough on the outside, but sweet on the inside. Tatum's mom enters the room to let Sid know she's got a call from Ghostface, who teases her for turning in the wrong guy and raises the stakes by revealing that he was responsible for her mother's death, officially starting the chase in the story. Notice how Dewey never leaves his room until Sid hangs up the phone. Some more misdirection for you. Back at school, Linda Blair makes a more obvious cameo when she asks probably the most insensitive question any reporter can ask.
So how does it feel to be almost brutally butchered?
Hey, now leave her alone.
People want to know. They have a right to know.
Craven had Blair appear not simply because of her legendary role in The Exorcist, but because she had starred in the 1978 TV film he directed, Stranger in Our House, also known in Europe as Summer of Fear, since it's based on the Lois Duncan novel. And for the nerds out there, this TV movie was Craven's first time shooting in 35mm film. Sid apologizes to Gail for smacking her in the face before it's revealed that Sid's mother's case was the biggest news story of the prior year. Now, Cotton Weary is getting the death penalty penalty, even though Gale strongly believes he couldn't have committed the crime. One of the reasons I find this film so compelling is how little information Williamson gives the audience. It almost feels like you're watching a sequel to a movie that doesn't exist. Incorporating the story with Maureen Prescott keeps the audience interested in what's happening, which I've seen many slashers fail to do. Mix that with Craven's directing choices to throw off the audience. For example, when he cuts to a close-up of Kenny intending to make him a potential suspect. Not only is there a mystery as to who the killer is, but there's also this complex backstory that keeps changing Sid's perspective. We can tell she's unsure of her memories and their credibility, making the audience doubt if we can trust her since every other character says otherwise. This reminds me of the Ash conformity experiments, which revealed how the social pressure of a majority could very likely influence someone to ignore their thoughts and conform to everyone else. This film keeps any reader or viewer interested because unlike many horror movies, not only do we care to find out who the killer is, but we want to learn more about our protagonist's backstory. In school, we meet up with Sid, Tatum, and Stu, who's looking a little too hard in the mirror, almost like he got hurt the night before.
Oh, you mean after you branded him the Candyman?
Ooh, be careful with the other four, Stu, even though I had a pleasant experience with Candyman myself.
Oh, fuck.
After getting freaked out by some jerk in a Ghostface costume, Sid runs away only to run right into Billy, who was let out once his phone bill came clean. Billy then tells Sydney to get over her mom's death, even though it's barely about to be a year, which, according to Craven, is the point where it puts Billy on the edge from being sympathetic to a total creep. This is also the scene where Neve Campbell had an emergency and left before they finished filming, so they shot Ulrich's close-ups while he talked to the first assistant director, Craven himself, and the microphone stand with an X on it to help his eyeline. The latter ended up being his best performance. Following that pretty tense situation, we see Principal Himbry getting riled up with the teens running around as Ghostface. Maybe put the scissors down, Fonzie. We follow up with Sid when we see her go to the restroom.
She was never attacked. I think she made it all up. How did she lie about it? For attention. The girl has some serious issues.
They were initially going to cut this scene with the mean girls due to it feeling a bit isolated from the rest of the movie, but Craven realized how much it was doing for Sid's character when it came to her growing confusion with the mysterious death of her mother and who she really is and where she comes from. So even though Williamson wrote it as black cold humor, it ended up being good development for Sid as a character. After the girls leave, Sid finally has the restroom all to her. God damn it! I hate when that happens. Nothing more infuriating than having someone try to kill you during a place of business. For this scene, Craven wanted to touch on another horror cliche with the bathroom stalls. Because we see the killer wearing these boots, they had to make all the suspects wear large black shoes, which is why sometimes they'll purposely show someone's feet. I feel like there's an opportunity for a joke here. Anyways, once escaping a clumsy Ghostface, we get an adorable scene with Dewey and Gale flirting outside the school, where Arquette gives us some Presley vibes.
Now, David is a huge admirer of Elvis Presley. I think you can see part of his love of that in this scene and a couple of the looks he gives.
This scene also includes a news report which featured a real-life journalist, Lisa Canning, who later appeared in Drake and Josh. It's revealed that school is suspending all classes and Woodsboro is now under a curfew, giving Stu Mocker the perfect opportunity to throw a party at his house.
Intimate gathering, intimate friends.
What do you say, Sid? I mean, pathos could have its perks.
Totally protect you. Yo, I am so buff. I got you covered, girl.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah? Nice. Cool, you guys bring food, all right?
Looking a little persistent there, Stu. It's also worth taking note that he just picks up Tatum so easily, in a position that kinda looks familiar. It's almost like that sort of strength would be used to carry another body. Also, why does he go back towards the direction of the school? This mystery keeps getting juicier. Let's see how Mr. Himbry's okay. This scene was added after Bob Weinstein read the script and disliked that 30 minutes had gone by without any brutal kills.
And he called me up and said, "You gotta kill somebody, Kevin. Someone's gotta die." There's like 30-minute gap where no one's getting offed.
So thanks to that comment, we get this fantastic shot of Ghostface, which was also suggested by Bob and was done by getting a clean shot of Winkler's eye and then compositing Ghostface as a reflection. This is also the same scene that rewards the horror fans with a little cameo from Fred the janitor, played by Wes Craven himself. Craven was asked by someone in the crew to do a Hitchcock-style cameo, but he was hesitant. Finally, after much perseverance, Craven agreed and went to the New Line storage to grab the actual Kruger sweater. He said that he felt ridiculous while getting the shot. At Tatum's, we get a piece of dialogue that Williamson was advised to cut out. Craven's agent even told him he would never work again if they left this one line in.
Well, you can't prove a rumor, that's why it's a rumor.
But it's another thing, that just makes the film real. Normally, nobody would ever mention these things in a film.
On a lighter note, not only did we get a controversial line, but we also got one of Craven's favorite sentences from the entire film.
Duck Other said, you're starting to sound like some Wes Carpenter flick or something.
That totally needs to be a shirt.
Totally.
Tatum mentions Richard Gere in this scene.
I mean, you can only hear that Richard Gere gerbil story so many times before you have to start believing it.
For those of you who are like me and never understood the reference, Richard Gere is an actor who appeared in movies like Pretty Woman, American Gigolo, and Primal Fear. Somehow, an urban legend started floating around that claimed Gere was taken to the emergency room after having a gerbil stuck up his rectum. But a quick Google search will confirm that this is not true and was simply a crazy rumor. In the original script, this scene was followed by Billy and Stu walking to Blockbuster, asking each other how they did. In my opinion, I'm delighted this was removed because not only would it further give away who the killers are, but the dialogue gives me the Three Stooges type of energy. Instead, we cut to a clip of Frankenstein playing in the video store, which Craven included as a salute to classic horror, which worked out since Scream would end up being another highly influential film.
And it's also saying, in 20 years, any film made today has the possibility of being considered a treasure, so don't trash it too much, critics.
The video store scene is another example of Williamson playing with the audience. When Randy sees Billy acting flirtatious with two other girls in the horror section, he compares the entire Ghostface situation to Prom Night, a film that inspired Williamson to include many deceitful characters in the script. And because the sheriff, janitor, and principal were all red herrings in that film, he did the same for Scream. The commentary on horror cliches throws the audience off balance by making them assume that because a film is self-aware, it means they won't do said cliches, when Randy essentially gets everything right.
He's got killer printed all over his forehead. What's his reason? Maybe Sydney wouldn't have sex with him.
Now you're no longer a virgin.
Why can't they find her pops, man? Because he's probably dead. His body will come popping up in the last reel somewhere.
Guess we won't be needing this anymore.
When Randy says there's always some stupid bullshit reason to kill your girlfriend, we can see this extra behind him react. On the day they filmed this, Craven went through 3 different extras before getting the subtle reaction he wanted. Randy gets freaked out after getting sandwiched between Billy and Stu in this oddly intimate moment. Good thing that won't happen again. We cut to shots of people closing for curfew when The Town That Dreaded Sundown from 1976 is referenced alongside Meg Ryan.
I see you as a young Meg Ryan myself.
Thanks, Dewey. With my luck, they'd guess Tori Spelling.
What's hilarious about that line is that Tori Spelling would play Sidney Prescott in the Stab movie featured in Scream 2. She would also appear in Scary Movie 2, which is what Scream 2 would have been called if the title was never changed. Anyways, Sid and Tatum head out to buy some snacks for Stu's party. Coincidentally, Ghostface pops out right as Tatum mentions Billy's, well, you know.
Billy and his penis don't deserve me, right?
If Billy's under the mask, then that's pretty funny. But if it's Stu, then that's just more proof to add to all the theories regarding their relationship.
I'm ready, baby!
We meet up with Dewey and the sheriff, where it's revealed that the calls were coming from Neil Prescott's phone and that the following day would be the anniversary of Maureen Prescott's death. Craven had to be careful about staging any suspects, so he made sure that instead of going towards the station, we see Dewey wander off at the end of the previous scene and come back in this scene. Another significant bit of direction is that every time the sheriff smoked his cigarette, Dewey would eat some ice cream to further contrast each other's age. And because Joseph Whipp had quit smoking 10 years prior, he was dying to film this scene. Ah, look, there goes the boot. Finally, we have arrived at scene 118, Stu's house, where the rest of the film takes place. Williamson said that all the actors would harass him about writing a significant chunk of the movie at night since it required overnight shoots, a common thing for scary movies. Then finally, Jamie Kennedy told him that he should have written the entire movie during the day if he genuinely wanted to break a cliche. It accidentally rhymes. Dewey drops the girls off and we get this excellent crane shot that parallels the ending. This entire sequence was filmed at a farmhouse at the top of the hill. The house was built by an older couple, and just as it was completed, they both died within a month, leaving it abandoned. Their children were next of kin, so they became the homeowners. Not knowing what to do with it, the filmmakers convinced them to allow filming to take place there. Since then, the house has gained the nickname the Scream House and will often have some sort of event in October, allowing people to join a guided tour or even spend the entire night, as Airbnb did in 2021 for the 25th anniversary of the film and the release of Scream 5. They even had David Arquette act as the host. Now, how awesome is that? Inside the home, we enter the kitchen where we see Stu holding up a beer pong that Williamson took to set since Craven didn't know what he was referring to in the script. Remember, this was before Google. Dewey sees Gail, who asks him if she could join him in checking the place out. She takes this opportunity to set up what becomes one of my favorite plot devices of the film, the delayed camera in the living room. Stu asks Tatum if she could get him a beer from the garage, which leads us to our subsequent Ghostface encounter, and what Craven says were many teenage boys' favorite scene. And because Rose McGowan says she's been asked many times, no, she's not wearing any prosthetic on her chest. It was simply frigid the night they filmed. Originally, Williamson wrote this scene as a fight between Tatum and Ghostface. She would die when the garage door came down and got her neck. But Williamson's assistant gave him a fresh idea when she revealed that she had a dog door in her garage, leading to a more exciting death with Tatum trying to escape through that small opening. While building the garage door, many crew members would try to prove that you could get through it. As for Rose McGowan, she did her own stunts here and fit easily through the door, forcing the filmmakers to staple her in position, leading to bruising due to the aluminum. In an IndieWire interview, she said that when she's locked out of her own home, she's gone in through the dog door, which is pretty cool considering that I could never do that. Tatum's death was heavily cut down by the MPAA. Craven calls this kill his Hitchcockian style scene since it has so many different cuts and angles, which they shot for weeks by going out and getting additional pieces of footage. This scene also includes some incredible stunts by Dane Farwell, the stuntman in the Ghostface costume, most of the time. The bottle hitting the crotch and the killer's head were both one-take only shots thrown by stunt coordinator Tony Caesar. But let's take a moment to respect Tatum's death since we never see her older brother Dewey mourn her. I mean, I guess she's mentioned in passing, and we do see her urn in the 5th film.
I feel quite badly that Dewey was never sad about Tatum's death.
I mean, I obviously should have mourned the death of my sister.
What a cold bastard.
That happened later in the hospital room. What do you mean she's gone?
A popular question that Williamson receives is, who killed who? He says he used to know the answer, but has since forgotten and will now Google it whenever he's asked. Zach Cherry made a great video that details Ghostface's plan, so I recommend watching his video if you want a more in-depth explanation of how exactly each kill was pulled off. But if you've been watching, I already told you who did what through lower thirds. After Tatum's death, Stu tells Sid he doesn't know where Tatum is, and then Billy immediately jumps out, gives Stu a look, and Stu gets all cheeky. What's great about this is that on a first watch, we can assume Billy has talked to Stu about trying to get back with Sid that night. But on rewatch, you can tell that Tatum's death had to have been planned out before the party.
One of the fun things in this film is making sure that we had the people that turn out to be the killers accounted for at all times, so that there was somebody that was gone that could be doing the mayhem. And I think that's why so many audience members go back and watch this over and over again, because it's such an elaborate construction, and it does hold true. I don't think you ever cheated in the script.
What's interesting is when I set out to write it, I just sort of was concerned about who the killer was, what their motive was, how they were carrying out their plan, and it all fell into place. And going back in retrospect, I was like, yeah, it did all sort of work out. It was one of those sort of miraculous things that you just, because it could have been a very, very confusing whole to work out.
Right.
Billy and Sid go upstairs to talk things out. Then we get this powerful scene where Sid becomes vulnerable and expresses her grief and fears to Billy. In the script, there is this extra line of Sid saying, "Every time I get close to you, I see my mom," likely hinting that maybe her gut feeling was saying that Billy's the killer, even though people keep telling her otherwise. I get why this was left on the cutting room floor, since it was likely a little on the nose for Craven.
I think this also is a beautifully written scene, and I think the kids did a great job. You know, Skeet just takes you back and forth between suspecting him, not suspecting him, suspecting, not suspecting. And when you go back and look at it at the end, after you know what happens in the film, all the talk that you wrote about life is a movie, it's all just a movie, but you don't get to choose your genre, have wonderful sort of repercussions and echoes to the different interpretations of the reality of this film.
During the production of this scene, Ulrich would ask Craven if it was subtle enough that he would look over in the direction of where Ghostface would be coming out later, since Ulrich wanted to give the viewers something fun to look back on. After Sid's able to let her emotions out, she decides it's time to lose her virginity to Billy, making her open to getting killed by Randy's rules, which are stated in the next scene. This also means the B story is resolved since Sydney came to terms with her emotions and Billy got what he wanted. We've seen references to Halloween by having the film brought up by characters, similarities where we see a girl popping popcorn, and a character dying in a garage. But having the film play in the background during the story's climax has to be Williamson's most significant homage to his favorite horror film. While giving his rules speech, we can see Halloween is paused on a frame showing a medium close-up of the blade, which Craven says was done on purpose to further convey the theme that the naked blade is throughout the film.
I'm getting another beer. You want one? Yeah, sure. I'll be right back.
Technically, Randy is right when he says that people who say that end up dying, just not in the way that you think. In fact, what works so well about this rule scene is that Randy is absolutely right when referring to other slashers, but Craven and Williamson cleverly break all these rules as soon as they're set up. But we'll get to that later. We cut to Gail and Kenny, who is oddly mesmerized by this Cheeto, and are reminded of the 30-second delay. Dewey knocks and asks Gail if she would like to go on a walk with him to scope out the area, to which she agrees. This was Williamson's last attempt to make Dewey the prime suspect.
You're not scared, are you?
Once again, another great improvisation from David Arquette. At the party, we see guests start to leave and get this little hint about Stu's unfaithful motives.
What happened to him, Stu? She probably got pissed at me and bailed.
Inside the house, we get this excellent editing choice between the teens watching Halloween and the sex that's going on upstairs. And just as Williamson wrote in the script, we have this great choice to not reveal any nudity since the goal was to not do what the audience thought they would do. While writing, Williamson started having trouble getting rid of the other teenagers who weren't important to the story. Because Bob Weinstein suggested adding another kill, Williamson figured it out and had the teens leave to mess with Principal Hembry's body, which Randy says was hung from the goalpost on the football field, officially removing assets for our characters.
And in addition, I got to carry on that hard-edged, cynical attitude that children have today.
Meanwhile, we get this sweet scene with Dewey and Gail walking down the road before nearly getting hit by the teenagers who are excited to play Stand By Me. The two jump into a ditch where Gail finally makes the first move and kisses my main man Dwight.
Is that what you're looking for?
My whole life.
Along with that last line, Arquette also improvised. Both are tiny additions, but do a lot for the character by making him a bit unsophisticated here and having Gail push him off the road, even though the original script has the roles reversed. Then having him totally lovesick even though they nearly got run over. So it's a testament that Arquette brings that pure and childlike energy to this Woodsboro cop. Arquette and Cox both have lovely on-screen chemistry, which adds up when you know that the two were quite flirty on set. Craven even remembers when Cox talked about Arquette, describing him as cute, but this guy's nuts.
Dirty minds for you, Conan. I know there's a little deviant sexual demon lurking below that all-American Irish exterior.
The two would go on to date and get married in 1999, right before the release of Scream 3, then had a daughter together in 2004. They would stay married for 11 years until they separated in 2010, expressing that they still love each other. Dewey and Gail's relationship is easily one of my favorite aspects of the rest of the sequels, so it was unfortunate to find out they weren't together anymore, but they also seem to both be doing well. Without getting too out of track, I just want to say that Dewey's theme is introduced in the sequel, and it's so beautiful. It instantly makes me think of both characters and always warms my heart. His theme was created by the same composer who made the music for this first film, Marco Beltrami. Scream was his first feature after working on some television projects. He was found by Craven's assistant, Julie Plec, when she was on the internet and went on what I believe is a forum or site called Hollywood Cafe. She asked for a new, fresh fresh and outstanding composer, then several people mentioned Marco's name. After Craven heard some of his music, he told Beltrami, "All the demo tapes we get, everyone sounds like John Williams. You're the first one that sounds like your original." He then asked him to score the entire opening sequence. Beltrami had never seen a horror movie at this time since he wasn't a fan of the genre. This helped him score this opening in a non-traditional, naive way where Beltrami focused on creating operatic feeling music based on the character's point of view. This became the basis of how he and Wes would approach a film score. Once Craven heard the demo, Beltrami was officially hired and would continue to work with Wes for the rest of his film career, except for the 1999 musical Craven directed, Music of the Heart, which had music done by Mason Daring. Alright, let's get back to the picture. After finding Neil Prescott's car, proving to the characters and the audience that he's the prime suspect, Gail and Dewey immediately head back to Stu's house, where Sid is getting dressed after losing her virgin privileges in this horror film. However, even though Randy claims only the virgin final girl can outsmart the killer, we get an immediate insight that even after doing all that, she's smart enough to question what Billy used his one phone call for. So, once again, the audience wonders whether it was him for the final time. But that all goes out the door when Billy is stabbed to death by Ghostface, making this Sidney's lowest point and starting the big final girl chase, where we get some great Steadicam shots and a remarkable fall by one of the stunt women. And I may be looking a bit too deep into this, but isn't it interesting that Sidney jumps off the second floor? When she looks back up, Ghostface is gone, which could be considered an inverted situation of Michael Myers falling off the second story, only for Dr. Loomis to look down and find him gone. So do you think it's an homage or a coincidence? The bad guys close in when Sidney finds Tatum hanging off the doggy door. Yikes. Of course, this was a fake body similar to Casey's made by the special effects team. Interesting enough, a minute prior to this, you can in fact see a doll resembling Casey's death. Inside the house, we get one of the best scenes from the entire film that I bet made moviegoers both laugh and crap their pants. As we hear Randy's commentary while watching Halloween, Ghostface approaches him, creating the ultimate meta scare of the film, which must have been fun to direct.
This is fun for me because you've got a situation where you've got about 4 types of media working at once. You've got the film the audience is actually watching. You've got people watching on video cams that are live. You've got kids watching movies and talking about those. And, you know, it's like this wonderful sort of layer cake of realities and various versions of the truth.
Another fun little coincidence is that Randy says,
"Jamie, look behind you."
Which is pretty meta considering Randy is played by Jamie Kennedy. So we know that stuntman Dane Farwell plays Ghostface for most of the film, but this is a unique shot because according to Craven and Ulrich, it's the only time we ever get to see Skeet Ulrich be the one inside the Ghostface costume.
This actually was Skeet Ulrich playing the killer at this point. This is the one time that we had him doing that.
However, Lillard has said at conventions that he was the one in the outfit, so there's a chance that there was a different take or angle where Lillard also got to wear the costume that maybe didn't make it in.
Walking behind Jamie on that shot from the camera on the TV back to the couch.
That was you.
That was me. Well, I did one of those too, though. That day.
The third and final reason why this scene rolls so hard is because we get this great moment of Kenny caring enough about this random teenager to go out and face a killer, only to remember that there's a 30-second delay, making his death feel more brutal. And as a cherry on top, Kenny uses his dying words to help Sid escape. A beautifully written horror scene from Williamson with masterful directing from Craven. But it must have been a bit odd on set considering that W. Laurel Brown, who plays Kenny, had his spouse visit him this day and got scared when she saw how realistic of a job the special effects team did. Also, this moment of having technology fail on Kenny is one of the moments where Craven wanted to emphasize the idea that just because technology is evolving, it doesn't mean everything will be solved, an attitude that younger people will often give off. But in reality, technology can sometimes be more of a dream or an illusion for better things. Realistically, it could create worse situations, as the film's delayed camera feed and cell phone show us.
Right, the technology is not bringing, peace and love.
As Sidney continues running, Dewey and Gail arrive at the house. While Gail calls the sheriff, our courageous hero Dewey scopes the place out in this greatly timed scene that perfectly matches with Halloween, which they achieved in the second take.
Well, the credit goes to David, really. He just, he made it so human because the guy's doing this sort of standard, thrust of the gun towards target, but he looks scared shitless, and that's just a great...
But your lay-in of the Halloween music and
true.
It's perfect. The timing, the cue, it's all right on.
Outside, Gail looks for Kenny before finding a suspicious-looking pile of blood. She attempts to call 911, but we get the biggest jump scare of the entire franchise. Gail freaks out, so she tries to quickly pull out by reversing, then slams the brakes only to move Kenny's body forward onto the windshield. Now, science has it that if Gail reversed and then slammed the brake, Kenny's body shouldn't have moved forward.
You know, it was pointed out to me that by someone that if you're going backwards and you slam on the brakes, a body would not fall forward.
Well, see, actually, he was, by her starting up backwards very suddenly, he was just caught loose from being caught, and it just happened to be the moment when he fell down.
Exactly.
Okay, so I flunked high school physics.
Exactly.
Gail, still panicked, ends up driving off the road and crashes into the trees, an incident that was not supposed to happen on set. It was initially supposed to go off-road, then flip and roll down the hill, but instead it refused to turn over and crashed straight into the trees. Of course, crew members who saw this happen were worried, thinking the stuntwoman was hurt, especially Williamson, who was there that night to witness his first ever film stunt. However, she ended up being safe thanks to a 5-point harness she was in. Then, according to Craven, she casually got out and grabbed a coffee. Thankfully, it ended up being a stunt gone wrong that didn't result in any injuries and worked rather well, as Craven stated. Sydney runs in this moment inspired by Sissy Spacek and Carrie, two blood-drenched women just trying to get by. Sid sees Dewey step out of the house, only to find out he's been stabbed in the back. Literally. This shot annoyed Craven because it took them around 10 takes to get, since the fake knife on Arquette kept falling off. One of the things Williamson likes that Craven added is having the killer wipe the knife every time it gets bloody, an attribute that seems to have been created by Dane Farwell, considering that Craven says he would often think in character even if he was only doing stunts. Sid runs back and attempts to steal the cop car, only to find out Ghostface has the keys in this suspenseful scene that Williamson initially wrote in high school. When he started writing Scary Movie, he reused the idea. Thankfully, it made it into the final film because it nearly had to be cut out due to their tight production schedule. But Craven and his great team fit it in a very short period of time, as he's said. Also, it feels like I keep describing Sydney doing the same things, and I'm not the only one who feels that way because, according to Ulrich, there was an on-set joke where they would all ask what Campbell was doing that day. Screaming, crying, running, or all the above. Sid's able to escape in this fantastic Steadicam shot, only to lose sight of Ghostface. We hear our favorite horror freak call her name, but before he can approach her, she grabs Dewey's gun and makes him stay back. For Randy's limping, Jamie Kennedy had a rock the size of a hen's egg inside his shoes to get the limp right. Craven wasn't aware until the end of the evening when Kennedy was sent to the doctor because of the damage he had done to his foot. As Randy starts to blame the killings on Stu, he shows up to beg Sydney to give him the gun. But in what must be a callous choice, Sid is smart enough to know that she's gotta look out for herself first, so she locks them both outside. Before she can even get a second to collect her thoughts, Billy limps out of the room in the performance of a lifetime, then falls down the stairs to give us more of that improv.
A very tricky thing for him to sell, but he did it somehow, saying, it's okay, I'm stuck, bleeding like a stuck pig, but I'm okay, which he just threw in there.
I'm like a stuck pig.
I bet you are, Billy. Sid gives him the gun, only for him to unlock the door and let Randy in. In one of the most remarkable and frustrating reveals, Billy quotes Psycho right before sending a blow to Randy's chest. Jesus Christ! It's crazy to think that these are all supposed to be high schoolers. Surprisingly, the MPAA wasn't bothered by the fact that it was teenagers acting as killers. Instead, they said it was too imitable because they only used a knife found in a kitchen.
I think they're really more comfortable with a sort of Rambo-ish murder mayhem where people are machine gunning and stuntmen are flying off air rams, and it's all kind of unreal. But it's when it's so personal and intimate as this film was in so many times, especially in that ending scene, they feel like, oh my God, that's too real, we can't show that to people, they'll go out and do it. Which I think is really a gross underestimating of the audience's intelligence and integrity.
Sydney realizes that her intuition was correct, meaning the Hightower surprise is that Billy was the killer the entire time. Stu walks in, so she begs him for help, only to find out that
Surprise, Sydney.
there are two killers in this picture, proving that both Sid, Randy, and many in the audience guessed correctly, but likely took their prediction back. Even Roger Jackson, the voice of Ghostface, must have been surprised when he wasn't told who the killers were because he was only given the pages with his lines. Of course, this is true for all the other sequels to avoid any potential leaks. Williamson was afraid that this twist wouldn't work. He was worried moviegoers would question how one killer could do all that and then make it evident that two people were involved. But I guess Williamson didn't realize that even if audiences thought of that, they would just assume it was another crappy horror trope where somehow the killer can move so quickly or be able to survive multiple gun wounds. As Williamson put it, he wanted an Agatha Christie reveal.
I think maybe audiences just assume you're being sloppy.
Yes.
And at the end of the film, they'll be able to say, you know, it wasn't possible for that guy to have done it.
And because it's officially revealed that Billy is the mastermind behind all this madness, let's talk about Ulrich's process regarding getting in character. Before filming Scream, Ulrich had been in production for the 1997 film Touch, where he starred alongside Bridget Fonda and Christopher Walken. The movie takes place in 90s Los Angeles and follows a young man named Juvenile who discovers he's the second coming of Christ. After he wrapped this film, he only had 1 week to mentally prepare for the role of Billy Loomis, meaning he had to go from this sweet Jesus-like character to playing a deranged serial killer. This was a bit taxing for the 26-year-old actor, so to help him get into character, Ulrich went to the mall and bought multiple black lights and black light posters to decorate with. He was given a double suite hotel room during Scream's production, so he turned the living room into Billy's room and would go in there to watch movies and read books about different serial killers. Around this time, Ulrich was approached by a magazine that wanted to do an interview with him. Shocked to think anyone would like to write an article on this up-and-coming actor, Ulrich agreed and they set up a time to talk on the phone. During the conversation, Ulrich was asked about Touch and what project he planned on doing next. He said he was preparing to play a killer for his next role.
Bitch! You bitch! Where the fuck are you?
After he hung up, Ulrich realized that he had essentially spoiled the entire film, so he immediately called his publicist for help. Thankfully, the people who conducted the interview were cool enough to remove any mention of it, making it one close call for Skeet Ulrich. We find out that Billy and Stu were the ones responsible for the death of Sid's mother after Billy reveals that her mother was sleeping with his dad, causing his own mom to leave the family. They framed Cotton Weary as the murderer and have been working on framing Neil Prescott as the Ghostface killer who killed a bunch of their peers and then ended his own life, making Billy and Stu the only survivors. But to do that, they have to look like they struggled, leading us to this crazy scene we'll get to in a bit. But first, let's talk about their motives. When Williamson sold the script, there were two groups of people who would comment on the ending. A few preferred the killers to have some motive, and others felt it would be more disturbing if there was no motive. Williamson took the note and decided to make it both. Billy has a reason to kill, but Stu doesn't really have one and says it was peer pressure. So we have one killer who's very calm and strategic about his revenge, and another who's clearly crazed with his killings and probably already thought about it but didn't have the smarts to get away with it, which is why Billy and Stu complete each other.
Yeah, it leaves a wonderful sort of ambivalence about it all, because everybody's looking for one interpretation or another of what scary films do to an audience. You know, those that think the more scary the picture is, the more the audience is going to go out and duplicate that. And then others that, which I would include myself among, that think that they're a great release of a lot of things, including pent-up fear rather than pent-up violence.
Something Williamson also balanced very well is the fact that Billy's motive isn't that strong. Sure, it sucks he went through that. Still, I don't think it's enough to cause all this mayhem and brutally slash innocent teenagers, which is why this line is essential and the perfect commentary that Williamson added.
Don't you blame the movies! Movies don't create psychos! Movies make psychos more creative!
One of Williamson's goals was to make a point that you can't blame movies for violence, but by including the message in a scene where two dudes start stabbing each other before they murder a father and daughter, it creates that ambivalence. This scene also features Billy and Stu in some heavy homoerotic vibes. Like, look at that. Considering that Stu seems to constantly want to live up to Billy's standards, I wouldn't be surprised if there was something more than just peer pressure that motivated him. However, in all my research, I haven't found any evidence from Kevin Williamson that suggests Billy and Stu are a thing. There is a chance that it could have been a subconscious thing, considering Williamson is openly gay. When asked at Monster Mania 31, Ulrich said it was never seen that way and it didn't become a thing until fans started saying so. Lillard has compared the characters to Captain Hook and Smee, which is pretty funny considering that in Hook, Dustin Hoffman and Bob Hoskins secretly decided to play the characters as if they were a gay couple.
Don't try to stop me this time, Smee. Don't you dare try to stop me this time, Smee. Try to stop me. Smee, you better get up off your ass. Get over here, Smee. I'm coming. Smee! This is not a joke. I'm committing suicide.
Anyhow, Ulrich and Lillard have both been supportive of thinking whatever you want because any sort of art aims to be interpreted in the way that will have the most meaning to you. Regardless, in real life, the two seem to have a great relationship. Well, that is until Lillard drops the ball.
I mean, we were great friends until he lost my dog.
Wait, what?
Actually got my dog stolen, and then I just said, I'm not talking to this guy.
And that's why you hit him on the phone, dick.
That's an absolutely true story. I was taking care of.
Not his fault.
No, it was totally not my fault.
Not at all.
Bro, you still hate me.
Oh, I didn't like that dog anyway.
Let's get it all.
Trying to make him feel better.
Let's get it all out here tonight, guys. This is a safe place of healing.
Next question.
We reach a moment where all is lost for Sid when Stu brings out her dad. After revealing their plans, it's time for one of the final steps in their concrete plan, stabbing each other. Stu goes first and stabs Billy a little too hard, causing him to return the favor. You know, rewatching this scene a few times, it's no wonder this moment was such a big deal. Two teens stab each other violently to get away with a string of murders before they even finish their plan. They're literally doing it in front of Sydney. That's psychotic. This is one of the scenes that really connected with Craven and made him feel this film was unique. Never in a horror film at this point have you seen two antagonists completely take themselves out. They've been planning this for over a year, and their plan starts to fall apart once they hurt each other because, to quote Craven, they have no clue what actual violence does to somebody until they feel it themselves, which is the most immoral thing that can be said about this. Once they're done, Billy asks Stu for the gun. I think Stu's not feeling too confident in his partner, so he initially hesitates. A moment that Craven hoped would stun the audience and make them realize that this is not just another average horror film. This is a peculiar moment between two dudes, one of which is probably learning this year-long plan wasn't such a bright idea.
And I think it's just a wonderful, real moment that takes the whole film completely a million miles away from any sort of cliche situation into something that's just extraordinary.
This scene is filled with numerous quotable lines, many of which were improvised by Matthew Lillard, which at some point would stop crew members from doing their job since they could hardly stop laughing. Some of these lines included,
Houston, we have a problem here.
This moment where Ulrich's aim was messed up since the stickiness from the fake blood caused the phone to hit Lillard.
The phone, dick!
I've read two versions of this incident. The most common answer is that it was a complete accident. But in an interview with The Ringer, Ulrich said that Lillard asked him to do it to see what reaction he could give. Regardless, it wasn't previously planned.
You know, it was one of those things where the corn syrup is so sticky, or whatever it is they actually use, and I was supposed to throw the phone, but not necessarily at him. And just the stickiness of it all led to this
hitting me in the head. Sorry, Matt.
Fucking hit me with the phone, dick!
And probably my favorite one that adds so much to his character.
My mom and dad are gonna be so mad.
But contrary to popular belief, this line,
I'm feeling woozy here,
was not completely improvised by Lillard and was written by Williamson. While filming, Williamson started feeling queasy and disturbed, so he approached Craven and asked why there needed to be so much blood. Craven humorously handed Williamson the script and said the writer wrote a scene where two guys stab each other in a kitchen, nearly killing themselves. He then asked how he would shoot the scene without blood, leaving Williamson no choice but to yield to Craven.
Wes is like, one of his main quotes almost on every movie is, more blood.
More blood. Don't be stingy.
He's always saying more blood.
Back to the story, Stu cannot find the gun, and we get this crowd-cheering reveal with Gail Weathers holding them at gunpoint. Unfortunately for her, the safety's on, leading Billy to literally kick her out of the house. Gail falls on top of Dewey, a simple shot that had to be done around 10 times since Arquette and Cox would break out laughing in all the other takes.
Sorry.
Skeet Ulrich also gets some props on his improvisation when he cracks his neck, a moment that Craven loved so much that they added further sound effects to emphasize it. Starting to slow down from their wounds, Billy and Stu lose Sydney and give her the chance to execute the new plan in this great callback to the film's opening.
Are you alone in the house?
Bitch! You bitch! Where the fuck are you?
Billy looks around for her in another excellent synchronization with Halloween that helps slightly distract the audience for a quick jump scare when Ghostface stabs Billy in the heart, which sort of happened for real on set. You see, when Ulrich was 10 years old, he had open heart surgery that left him with a sensitive area in his chest with a stainless steel wire. When touched, it causes excruciating pain for Skeet, so during production, they had him completely padded up for this shot. However, because the mask was hard to see, the stuntwoman missed the second stab and hit him in the one spot that wasn't padded, which also happened to be where that steel wire was. This caused Ulrich to let out a genuine cry of agony. Stu seems to get a burst of adrenaline because he runs out of the kitchen to attack Sid, leading the two to have one final fight where they both improvise these great one-liners.
I always had a thing for you, Sid!
In your dreams.
This is not only great because the film that kicked off the slasher genre kills this contemporary villain, but also because in the late 90s, Matthew Lillard and Neve Campbell dated for a bit, so there definitely was some truth in that. No wonder Billy is so mean to Stu. Also, notice how the first rule of horror movies is you can never have sex, but Sid does and survives. The second rule is you can't drink or do drugs, but Randy lives.
I never thought I'd be so happy to be a virgin.
Finally, you can't say I'll be right back, and who's the only character who says that?
I'll be right back!
One of the killers basically gets himself killed for even agreeing to commit murder, and as Randy predicts, Stu did end up in the kitchen with a knife.
Okay, I'll see you in the kitchen with a knife. I remember.
This scene is interesting because initially, Randy was supposed to fight Stu and knock him out with the VCR. Then they would drag Stu's body next to Billy's so they were head to head, only for Sid to shoot both of them. I guess Williamson felt Randy needed to be more helpful, especially since he was setting up a romance between Randy and Sid. Still, I'm glad they ended up giving Stu a more creative death and having Sydney be the final girl who took the two killers out. When Sydney goes back to check on Billy, she's startled by Randy, who delivers this incredible line that perfectly exemplifies how well balanced this film is with its fun and fear.
Oh my God, Randy, I thought you were dead.
I probably should be. I never thought I'd be so happy to be a virgin.
The tricky goal Williamson was trying to achieve is that balance between humor and darkness, since he wanted the horror to work, but he also wanted the audience to be able to have a good time. In the end, Craven would help balance it by removing a few comedic lines that he felt were dragging down the scare.
It's a very tricky mix, and I've done it badly in other films, I think. You cannot be funny when somebody's dying. As here, I mean, you really suddenly feel for this man, and he's a human being.
According to Skeet Ulrich, balancing his serious character with humor was the most challenging part during the production of Scream, especially at the end with Stu's ecstatic feelings. But that's why casting was so crucial. Sydney and Billy were there to focus on the drama, while Stu, Randy, and Dewey provided the comedy and satire. That's likely one of the reasons why the deleted scene with Billy and Stu after school didn't work, since it's the only time Billy felt cartoonish. They never really made a dramatic character be a little on the silly side. Billy punches Randy and starts attacking Sid, only to have her stick her finger in his wound, giving this news reporter the perfect chance to make up for her blunder. What's great about this moment is how it wraps up Billy and Sydney's arc by having this intimate, reverse love-making type situation with Sid sticking her finger in Billy. Also, we get some more improvisation, but this time from Craven, who wanted Gail to have a great one-liner.
Guess I remember the safety that time, you bastard.
And let me just add that I'm pointing out improvisations I can confirm from the writer, director, or actor. But often, when a line is improvised, it'll get added to the script and printed in the next copy. So there's that disclaimer. At this point in the script, Williamson had trouble wrapping up the film and was unsure if he should follow the cliche in slashers with one more scare. He probably had just seen Child's Play, which maybe had one too many fake outs. But a good screenwriting tip is to write to your themes. So Williamson gave Randy one more moment to shine and concreted Sydney as a complete and total badass final girl.
Careful. This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
Not in my movie.
The very first draft of this ending was slightly different. First, Billy doesn't jump up as he does in the film. Instead, Sid is made aware of the horror cliche, so she puts her foot on Billy's chest and shoots him in the forehead. He doesn't immediately die. Instead, his body starts to shut down by having him blink a lot with blood bubbling out of his mouth. She then makes fun of his weenie and delivers the final shot. But I guess Craven didn't want to make her a cold-blooded killer, so he had Billy make a move first and kept it to one final blow rather than two. However, the most interesting thing about this ending is that there was originally supposed to be a line where Randy asks Sydney out on a date as they're untying her dad. Sid replies with, "Only if it's a nice Meg Ryan movie," a callback to the other 2 times she was referenced. Even though it was set up that Randy had a thing for Sid, I'm grateful this was changed since it would have made Randy a bit unlikable by making it feel as if he deserves a date with her just because they both survived this horrible situation. It's also an interesting case where we don't need that resolution between them. Thankfully, they decided to keep these 2 friends, which adds up since they're the last 2 survivors from the original friend group we saw at the water fountain. As the police arrive, Dewey is boarded on the ambulance and Gil reports what will be the biggest story of her career. We now enter the new world, where our characters will never be the same again. The ending was originally supposed to be one exterior shot. Still, on the day, Craven decided to get a quick insert shot of Dewey giving a thumbs up, just in case audiences found him too likable and wanted to undo his death. Thank goodness, because if he or Randy died, I would have had to deduct some points.
Dewey's character could have easily been slapstick, but David always brings it back to somebody who is really a true person. To me, it's always been one of the most interesting things to do in the genre is to start with situations that could be cliche or characters that could be cliche and then make it human. Because it always catches everybody off guard and makes it much more powerful.
Since the sun was setting, this last crane shot had to be done extremely quickly at the start of their final production day. They only had time to get 2 takes and used the first one in the final cut. What makes this all more impressive is that the pressure was all on Courtney Cox, who had to deliver lines that Williamson wrote as they were prepping the shot. But being the true testament to Cox's professionalism, she was able to memorize and perfectly deliver the lines on their first take before the sunset. The movie ends with some picture credits as a tribute to the actors and to bring the mood back up. Craven also did this in his first film, Last House on the Left.
Marianne Madalena and Kathy Conrad, the 2 producers, really just added a remarkable amount of material to the actual what's on screen with choices in wardrobe and just a governing hand on all the set dressings and everything else to make these characters really ring true as women.
One last, maybe not so fun fact, if you watch the credits, you'll see an additional director of photography credit for Peter Deming. This is because near the end of production, Craven would review dailies and find that many of the shots would be out of focus. This was brought to the attention of cinematographer Mark Irwin, who was asked to replace his camera crew and dolly grip. Irwin answered, "Why don't you get a new DP as well?" They responded with, "You know what? Good idea." Irwin and his team were fired and replaced when Deming stepped in to film for the last few days using Panavision cameras and anamorphic lenses. Deming would go on to film Scream 2, 3, and 4, along with other films like The Cabin in the Woods, Drag Me to Hell, and most recently, The Menu. So now it's time to quickly break down this film's story structure. I won't be repeating any of the hero's journey aspects. Instead, we're going to look at this picture from an 8th sequence approach, which further breaks down a story to make it more manageable. With Act 1 including sequences A and B, Act 2 has sequences C, D, and E, and Act 3 has F, G, and H. This has been my favorite way of looking at a story after learning it from the hit podcast The Writer's Room Game Show, when they talk about this book by Paul Joseph Gelino called Screenwriting: The Sequence Approach. So let's take a look at Sequence A. This is the entire opening that starts by introducing us to the meta themes by having Casey talk about movies the audience knows about, establishing we're in the real world.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Is that the one where the guy had knives for fingers?
Yeah, Freddy Krueger.
Freddy, that's right.
This also sets the mood, letting you know that what you're about to watch is violent, unforgiving, and will be a mystery. Sequence B. This entire sequence aims to introduce the characters we will follow for the next 90 minutes. First, we meet Sydney, who is established to be a virgin, then we meet the Scooby Gang and quickly learn what each of them is like.
Did you really put her liver in the mailbox? Because I heard that they found her liver in the mailbox.
And it's also revealed that Sydney's mother was killed almost a year prior. Sequence C. In sequence C, Sydney is immediately attacked by Ghostface. Williamson gives the audience its first bone by having Billy drop a phone, making him the suspect 30 minutes into the film. Ghostface also makes it known that Sydney is a prime target for him. Overall, the goal of this sequence is to play with the audience by having Billy be the potential killer, only to reveal at the end that his cell phone records were clean. Sequence D. I view Sequence D as a chance to let us live in Sydney's shoes for a while. She is the main character after all. Here we know that Gail is writing a book about Maureen Prescott where she writes ideas against Sydney's reality. Afterward, the insensitivity of teenagers is shown when two brats dressed as Ghostface run around the school knowing that their classmates are getting killed off one by one. Next, Sydney runs into Billy, making her feel like crap for still mourning her mother. And finally, when Sid takes a second for herself in the restroom, we hear some mean girls talking crap about her. Oh, and then Ghostface tries to kill her again. So yeah, at this point, I bet many audiences are rooting for Sid. Williamson also starts the romance between Dewey and Gail. Sequence E. Sequence E starts with Principal Hembree announcing a curfew, giving Williamson the chance to have Stu throw the party for the final act. Hembree is killed off so that later, the rest of the teens can naturally exit the film. Tatum reveals that she is kind of on Gail's side regarding Maureen's death, making Sydney feel even more isolated and confused. It's established that Randy is exceptionally knowledgeable about horror films when we see he works at Blockbuster and predicts the film's ending.
I'm telling you, the dad's a red herring. It's Billy.
Finally, we have Dewey comment that Sid looks like a young Meg Ryan, then talks with the sheriff about how Neil Prescott is now the main suspect. I see Williamson using this sequence for miscellaneous things he wants to set up before we enter the final act. It's his last chance to push Sydney emotionally in a direction that will solve the B-plot. Sequence F. Sequence F feels like Williamson wants to show what the party is like with everyone there. It's loud and fun and starts the gory kills with Tatum. During this sequence, we see multiple things happen. First, Williamson sets up Kenny's death with a delayed camera feed. Second, having Sydney's virginity taken makes her more vulnerable to receiving a Casey Becker type kill. Third, having Stu leave to prepare to attack Sid once Billy wraps up. And finally, the chemistry between Dewey and Gail is solidified by having them kiss and finding Neil's car, giving them a reason to head back to the house. Sequence G. I consider Sequence G the big horror chase scene that starts knocking out the list of suspects. Billy is seemingly dead, Randy is nearly killed, Kenny's throat is sliced, Gail crashes, and Dewey is stabbed, leaving Sydney helpless so the audience can start worrying about her life. Sequence H. Sequence H is the wrap-up where everything pays off. We've come full circle and now realize who the killers are and their motivation. This sequence does a great job at making the audience feel both smart because they had suspected Billy since Sequence C, yet feel foolish for not thinking about the possibility there was another killer, considering they're just wearing a Halloween costume. But Sydney's been through way too much that she doesn't go out without a fight, then proceeds to kill both Billy and Stu, ensuring they won't return for the sequel. I can see this method of breaking down your story making writing less intimidating since you're setting smaller goals rather than attempting to dive into an entire feature. In addition, each sequence has a purpose and ensures you're constantly moving forward with your characters to avoid a flat and potentially dull story. But also, it's not like you would need to do this or that it proves this film is a masterpiece. It's just another tool to make a story breakdown easier to understand. But now, let's wrap this section up with some setups and payoffs. First of all, here are all the times anyone died. So we get 2 right off the bat and 2 at the end, then 1 kill for sequences E, F, and G. Now for some of the hints to there being 2 people behind the Woodsboro slashings. Here's this shot of 2 teens dressed as Ghostface running around the high school, the first hint in the film that there are 2 killers. The second red herring occurs in the bedroom before Billy does the do, when we see he's wearing the same shirt as one of the teens running through the halls. In fact, it seems like the psycho killers in the Scream universe all wear some sort of blue-toned flannel. Then we see Billy and Stu sandwiching Randy at the video store, and finally, we see a similar shot of them cornering Sydney.
Now you gotta die. Those are the rules.
For the camera delay scare, you can see 4 reminders throughout sequence F for the big payoff in the middle of sequence G.
What? 30-second delay.
Ghostface makes only 4 calls in the entire film. 1 in the opening for Casey.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
2 in sequence C for Sydney.
Tatum, just get in the car.
Hello, Sydney.
Leave me alone.
Looks like you fingered the wrong guy. Again.
And one in sequence H for Billy.
Are you alone in the house?
Bitch! You bitch! Where the fuck are you?
Next up, we've got Sydney's closet door getting jammed. First, to avoid letting Neil catch Billy.
What's going on in there? Are you okay?
And second, to stop Ghostface from ending the movie too early. Billy loves to surprise Sydney because he does so in 5 out of 8 sequences. First, when he pops outside her window to talk about The Exorcist. Second, immediately after the Ghostface attack. Third, at school in this awkward encounter. Fourth, when he pops up at the party. And fifth, when he makes his grand appearance at the top of the stairs. Ooh, ouch. Meg Ryan is mentioned twice in the movie. First, in sequence E, when Dewey calls Sid a young Meg Ryan.
I see you as a young Meg Ryan myself.
Thanks, Dewey. With my luck, they'd guess Tori's spelling.
And second, when Sid expresses that she wished she was in a Meg Ryan film.
Why can't I be a Meg Ryan movie?
Initially, they mentioned her at the end when Randy asked Sid out, but that was removed for good reasons. On a quick side note, how funny is it that Meg Ryan is mentioned twice, and 26 years later, her son Jack Quaid would be a lead character in Scream 5?
Right, yes, of course. And I gotta make sure we don't get sliced up by some lunatic who saw Friday the 13th and thought, you know what, that Jason guy, he's got some pretty solid ideas.
Here are all the times that Cotton Weary is mentioned. If you notice, this is like a crop circle in Signs because it all points to the big reveal that Weary was framed like Gail had initially theorized, meaning she's a pretty darn good journalist.
If I'm right about this, I could save a man's life. Do you know what that could do for my book sales?
But how about Neil Prescott? Well, these are all the times he's mentioned or seen. It looks like a friendly starfish. Good job, Neil. Okay, this is a fun one. These are all the times when Randy was right. He claims that Billy is the killer.
He didn't do anything. You're such a little lapdog. He's got killer printed all over his forehead.
Predicts how Neil will show up.
His body will come popping up in the last reel somewhere.
Gives his rules speech, which Gail immediately breaks.
And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
Be right back.
Then finally calls out Stu for being the killer.
Stop right there!
Don't shoot, it's me! I found Tatum, she's dead! I think Stu did. No, listen to him, Sydney!
Only to have Sydney shut the door on him.
Fuck you both!
This is every time Halloween is referenced. Looks like this entire half section of the pie is filled with references to Williamson's favorite horror film.
Yes! Predictable. I knew he was gonna bite it. How can you watch this shit over and over?
This is a neat one. These are all the Sharon Stone references. The first is during the fountain scene.
That is so sexist. The killer could easily be female. Basic instinct.
That was an ice pick. Not exactly the same thing.
Next is when Gail is flirting with Dewey.
You're not supposed to be here.
I know. I should be in New York covering the Sharon Stone stalker, but who knew?
And finally, when Billy and Stu reveal their motives.
We did your mom a favor, Sid. That woman was a slutbag whore who flashed her shit all over town like she was Sharon Stone or something.
Yeah, we put her out of her misery, because let's face it, Sydney, your mother was no Sharon Stone.
But that's all I could find. Let me know in the comments if there are any I missed. If so, I'll pin them to the description or comment section of this video along with the credit. After a long and grueling shoot, Scream wrapped up on June 8th, 1996. The night before the final day of production, Wes Craven, the cast, and the producers all had dinner and wine together, then each talked about how they're all gracious to have made it to the end and reflected on how far they've come. This was a night they all held dear to their hearts, with both Campbell and Cox saying it was their favorite moment from the entire experience. When asked about their personal feelings on this set, all the cast members have nothing but good things to say. In this time when no one could just get on their phones, there is a powerful sense of camaraderie between everyone. With all their hotel hangouts, joking on set, and having their meals together, they all grew to become good friends. Towards the end of production, Jamie Kennedy got emotional over rapping, and Cox reminded him that's the way movies are. It's like summer camp for 3 months, and even though it's coming to an end, they'll have a bond that none of them will ever forget. Craven also told him, when you're making a horror movie, the experience doesn't have to be horrific, which is a line that really stuck with Kennedy. In a time when audiences preferred realism and grit, Scream came along and reminded us that slashers could be scary but still fun. For this reason, the film would end up being monumental for the horror genre, but many in the crew didn't see it coming. There would be times when the cast would sit around the bonfire as they waited for the next shot to get set up and would wonder if the movie would be successful, since the only notable name at the time was Drew Barrymore. They fantasized about the idea that maybe it would become popular enough for some Halloween stores to sell the Ghostface costume. If you've ever walked into any Halloween store, the massive fan base that Scream has built up over the years has helped Fun World consistently make enormous profits from allowing its use in the sequels and all their costumes sold for Halloween, making it the most profitable Halloween costume in the United States. Along with Ghostface, other characters like Casey Becker and Billy Loomis have become popular, easy-to-make Halloween costumes, with Billie Eilish dressing as Casey to attend the Hollywood Forever Cemetery screening of the film. So yeah, all those talks around the bonfire came to fruition. We've talked about the film's release and the financial and critical reception, but we haven't discussed a major marketing component for any film: the poster. The image that will greatly impact whether a casual audience member will choose your movie over the other options. The poster features Drew Barrymore looking spooked out, with Drew at the head of the line, and then Ulrich, Campbell, Cox, and Arquette. Imagine seeing this poster and deciding to watch the film because you remember Barrymore as the sweet little girl in E.T. Then it starts and you see one of the slowest and most brutal kills you've ever seen happening to the person you thought was the main character. During the photo shoot, Barrymore didn't think the poster would be as iconic as it would be, but maybe it didn't help that Barrymore was nervous during the session, thinking she was potentially pregnant.
Courtney, I remember at the poster shoot, I was like having a nervous breakdown because I was having a false sense of being pregnant. I kept asking you, how do you know if you're pregnant?
Various variations of the poster were made for marketing, but the key image of this close-up of Casey's face is her eyes wide open and her hand over her mouth, which sorta gives me Janet Leigh and Psycho vibes. They would also use this picture on many of the home releases. Oh, hey, yeah, speaking of home media, for today's presentation, we used this blue variant cover featuring Drew Barrymore. There's also a Sydney and Gale version, but you gotta go with the first Ghostface victim. These tapes were rented a lot in video stores, and I bet they created multiple different stories and memories for customers. I could also see a kid being prohibited from watching it, then finding a way to sneak off and watch it anyways. But this came during a time where the discussion of media influencing violence was only getting bigger and messier. We all remember Billy saying this line.
Don't you blame the movies? Movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative.
Williamson had written this on a note card, taped it on his wall, and focused on building the entire film from this one line. He came up with it after certain directors like Quentin Tarantino were being attacked by politicians or people who basically had no sort of statistical fact that violent media can create violent people. So Williamson wanted to answer the question in a subtle way that wouldn't attract too much attention. Yes, the two killers are into horror, but what about Randy? That guy's probably seen more movies than every character combined. Midway through production, Williamson was already working on developing the sequels and told Craven that this first film stated, "Don't blame the movies." So what would the second film ask? Well, then who do you blame? Spoiler alert for Scream 2, one of the killers ended up being Billy's mom, meaning that it all starts with the family. What made this film so brilliant is Williamson's ability to create these John Hughes coming-of-age films using the slasher formula that had been overused to death, all while depicting the contemporary desensitized nature that many kids were going through as they approached the new millennium. The meta commentary isn't there as a gimmick. By the end, it becomes what the film is all about.
There's definitely a tone, I think, that comes over a culture towards the end of a century and certainly towards the end of a millennium, where you feel like nothing is quite in the right place anymore, and you're sort of moving towards some grim, dark revelation. Whether that's true or not, I think that tone creeps over a culture.
The best compliment I could ever give this film is that Williamson did an outstanding job of caring for all the characters. They're what makes the movie for me. It's hard to write compelling people that the audience will care for in only 2 hours. Even a classic like Halloween couldn't accomplish this. I'm looking at you, Linda.
Totally.
Craven believes that a reason why Scream was so successful with audiences is that they finally felt acknowledged. It was the first time characters reacted in ways we would respond to in real life if we were being chased down by a killer with a knife. Realistically, we would also compare the situation to other horror films. It was a fourth wall break that was much needed to freshen up the genre.
You know, I think now the issue of how we perceive part of our reality as the reality of media is an important thing to do a film about. Because obviously a lot of the life experience that these kids have or think they have comes from movies. So it was interesting to do a film where you compare the movie version of say, a terrorist act to actually happening in a real person's life and how it's the same and how it's different. So that became something that the genre was very capable of, carrying, but nobody had tried it before.
Following Scream, a significant boom occurred in Hollywood where everyone was trying to recreate the magic and horror of this film. Movies like The Faculty, Valentine, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Final Stab, Urban Legend, or Cherry Falls, a film that reverses one of the most popular horror tropes and presents a killer who is seemingly only after people who haven't lost their virginity. Even Bride of Chucky and Seed of Chucky were inspired by Scream's meta humor and New Nightmare's self-referential plot.
Chucky, drag yourself into the 90s. Stabbings went out with Bundy and Dahmer. You look like Martha Stewart with that thing.
Who the fuck is Martha Stewart?
Ghostface was terrifying because of how he used the voice box, which would become a trope that would later be seen again in another genre-changing film that would come out 8 years later in 2004.
I wanna play a game.
4 years after Scream, we would also get the cinematic masterpiece Scary Movie, which was of course the same title Williamson had initially planned to call his movie. This film was a boom for parody films like Scream was for horror films. Sure, there were pictures like Airplane and Annie Mel Brooks movie, but Scary Movie gave us films like Disaster Movie, Epic Movie, Superhero Movie, and so forth. Scary Movie is, well, how should I say, very much of its time. The movie succeeds if you're in the mood for a raunchy, really dumb 88 minutes.
Run, bitch! Run!
Instead of Sidney Prescott, we have Cindy Campbell. Instead of Dewey Riley, we've got Doofy Gilmore, potentially a reference to when Tatum calls Dewey a doofus.
Does Mom know?
Yes, doofus.
Let's get you out of here.
Based on all the convention appearances I've seen, it seems it's always a bit awkward when asked if they've seen it. So, to answer your question, Neve Campbell said that she watched the first 40 minutes once and thought it was funny, but probably got the point. The only response I could find from Ulrich was that he was down for Scary Movie. And as for David Arquette, it seems like he's reminded about it frequently.
This film really made you a household name. I mean, you walk down the street, Dewey! Does it still happen?
Well, they say Doofy most of the time. Doofy from Scary Movie. And I'm like, well, actually not me, but thanks.
So, I recommend not calling him Doofy or focusing too much attention on a movie they weren't involved with, unless you're just really that curious. Williamson and Craven sought to create a film that made fun of slashers while celebrating the entire horror genre. It was a love letter to the classics.
It's alive!
The video nasties.
What movie is this from? I spit on your garage.
The religious horror boom in the 60s and 70s.
The Exorcist was on.
And the most of all, the slashers that made an impact on millions of horror fans.
Then you should know Jason's mother, Mrs. Voorhees, was the original killer. Jason didn't show up until the sequel.
Would you call me?
Watch out. Watch out, Jamie. You know he's around.
In a press interview, Craven says he doesn't see the film as horror, but as a thriller that is a murder mystery set among kids who love horror films. He claims that horror films are more of a heightened reality where you know who the killer is, just like Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees. While he's not wrong, I gotta disagree. Even though we don't know who's under the costume, we all know it's Ghostface and have an image to associate with that. So it technically falls into that same category of horror films he describes. I understand he was trying to step away from solely being associated with horror at this time, so he likely phrased it like that on purpose. It is a shame that horror often has a negative stigma, considering that many talented people make great spooky films. The genre is a great way to release tension and feel like you're on a roller coaster. They literally release endorphins and dopamine. When watching something considered scary, similar to a ride at Six Flags, you get that satisfaction of making it to the end. Except horror movies are watched in the comfort of a theater seat or your own home, so there's no way the film will put you in any actual danger, unless you're in Final Destination.
And I don't think people like to be scared, so that's not why they go to scary movies. They go to scary movies because they already have certain fears, and the movie brings it out in a way that's fun because you know you're not going to be hurt.
And for those who've ever wondered if actors like Neve Campbell or Alex Vincent from Child's Play have been frightened on set, the answer is no. Campbell has been asked at many conventions and says that it's not scary because with film production, there are many crew members around and watching you during a take. And on top of that, she's covered in uncomfortable red syrup. So next time you watch a spooky film, think of the scariest scene and imagine it without any music or sound design. Then picture yourself there around at least 20 other people operating fog, booming audio, or right out of frame, ready to make any touch-ups as soon as the camera cuts. Most of the horror scenes I've personally made feel silly to film because you're asking someone to act scary or scared on command after having waited a good while to set up one shot, which makes horror performances even more impressive to me. Following Scream, the entire cast and crew would move on and have great careers. Williamson thought his career would be over once they wrapped the project, so he said yes to everything he could. For example, Williamson was on set for Scream when he was offered to write the screenplay for the highly underrated movie The Faculty. He was later asked if he had ideas for a TV show, to which he said yes, when in reality, he had zero ideas. This would result in him making a show based on his childhood, Dawson's Creek. He later developed The Vampire Diaries with Craven's ex-assistant who initially brought him the script for Scary Movie, Julie Plec. David Arquette would appear in the rom-com Never Been Kissed, starring opposite Drew Barrymore. He'd also have a great role in the incredibly fun and cheesy Eight-Legged Freaks. On top of acting, Arquette became an official Bob Ross instructor and a professional wrestler, winning a heavyweight world championship. He later wrestled for Wrestling Pro Wrestling under the name Rob Boss. And if you're ever feeling down, I'd recommend watching any interview with Arquette. He's the goofiest and sweetest guy on camera. Every interview I watch with him just brings a smile to my face.
I used to hang out with strippers so much they called me lap dances with Wolf. That wasn't good.
Yeah, tell Courtney not to watch the show tonight.
Hey, come on.
I still feel like they're like a little more professional than me.
Everyone's more professional than you.
No, that's true. I swear. No, I know, but yo, you're right.
Courtney Cox would continue to play Monica in Friends until 2004 and has appeared in all of the Scream sequels as of Scream 6. Jamie Kennedy would go on to do films like Malibu's Most Wanted, Tremors 5, and my favorite recurring Cartoon Network film, Son of the Mask. One of Kennedy's first residual checks was double what he was paid for the movie. After cashing his check, Kennedy went across the street to the Blockbuster to rent Scream on VHS. Now, how much more meta can you get than that? Rose McGowan would describe Scream to be her favorite on-set experience she's ever had, and would go on to appear in films like Jawbreaker, Planet Terror, and Death Proof. She also played Paige Matthews in Charmed for 5 years and released an album called Planet 9 in 2018. Our favorite spit-fueled killer, Matthew Lillard, would give incredible performances in SLC Punk, The Descendants, and the first 2 live-action Scooby-Doo movies.
This is tied for the most terrifying day of my life. I was what? Every other freaking day of my life.
He continues to voice Shaggy in most animated Scooby-Doo films and video games.
You probably don't want to see my true form.
On top of that, he is making his return to horror by playing William Afton, the supposed antagonist in the Five Nights at Freddy's feature film. Quick fact about Scream 3, at the 2015 Spooky Empire convention, Lillard revealed that supposedly there was a version of that script where Stu would end up being the center of chaos and ordering kids to do horrible things at their high school. But because of the Columbine shooting that happened 3 weeks before production, the producers scrapped that since art and real life were getting a little too close.
The third one, they had written in me to be the killer in the third one. From jail, I was masterminding this kind of this attack against Sydney, Nev's character. And so 3 weeks before we were supposed to start shooting, Columbine High School broke out.
And just to clarify, Lillard was the only source I was able to find this out from. Scream 3 was written by Aaron Kruger, since Williamson had other commitments he needed to work on. In addition, Kruger would discard many of Williamson's notes, which is likely why Williamson would return to write the 4th installment. According to Williamson, the original script for Scream 3 was supposed to be about a group of kids obsessed with the stab films and wanting to top Sydney's level of fame as the final girl. So it is like the story Lillard described, but I can't find a good source to confirm that Stu was the original villain. And to be fair, it seems like Williamson only had a note or a rough outline for this 3rd film, so maybe he thought of having Lillard as the mastermind influencing these kids. Or maybe the thought led to Lillard being asked but never making it to any of the final outlines. Nonetheless, Williamson's Scream 3 sounds like it could have been great. From what I've read, it seems like it would have had some sort of Ghostface cult, which reminds me of a certain movie. The good thing is that, in many ways, we did get a version of this for the 4th film, which Williamson wrote. And you know what? I don't know where to insert this fact, but quick little trivia and spoiler alert regarding Scream 4, before Trevor gets killed, we see him wearing a similar outfit to Neil Prescott. Since we're already on the topic of sequels, as of late 2021, Matthew Lillard says he's never seen Scream 2 or 3, because it's like going to your ex's house for dinner with her new family and handsome husband, but has seen Scream 4. It's also funny because Lillard's wife hadn't seen the first movie until a 20th anniversary screening of the film back in 2016.
She had never seen it. We were dating. She's like, I could care less. So
Ulrich said at the same time that he hadn't seen any of the sequels at all, but I think there's a chance that may have changed. If you've seen Scream 5, you get it. But that's more than enough sequel talk. Let's go back to talking about their careers. Skeet Ulrich would give his likeness to appear as Saddam Hussein's poster child in the first South Park movie, then appear in multiple episodes of Law & Order, and play Jughead's dad in Riverdale. Ulrich and Lillard have made multiple appearances at conventions, allowing fans to get autographs and take pictures with their favorite on-screen killers. The two would also share career tips and give words of encouragement to anyone looking to join the film industry. In one of the Q&As, Lillard revealed that he only got paid $5,000 a week for 3 weeks, totaling to $15,000. Now that may sound like a great gig, but you only work for 3 weeks, then you're out again searching for the next role, which could take a while. On top of that, there were manager, agent, and tax fees removed, leaving him with very little money that he would have to stretch.
The visibility does not equal money. You think it does, and it doesn't. So a lot of people here are feeding their families on what you're doing. So again, humbly, thank you on behalf of everyone out there. Thank you for what you're doing.
Another great piece of advice they give that applies to any artist is to hold on to whatever you've created and are proud of to help you keep going, because every artist does their best to make something people will enjoy. It's only natural to sometimes miss the target and not make something you're necessarily proud of. Ulrich adds by recommending that success doesn't mean you have to make it in Hollywood.
Make it where you can make it and continue to do your work and continue to be you.
So if you're ever able to see them at a convention, I'd say go for it. After watching every panel I could find online, it seems like a great time. They genuinely seem like lovely people.
I'm sorry, I'm so nervous. You are such a sweetheart.
You want to go touch him? Go touch him.
Come here.
Come on. Let's go. Come on, let's go touch him. Everyone line up, let's all touch.
And because I noticed they're asked this at pretty much every panel, I'll answer it now. Ulrich's favorite horror film is The Exorcism of Emily Rose, and Lillard said his favorite is...
For me, it's Scream. Honestly, it's for me like, no, it's a great answer.
But let's talk about what the lead of most of the Scream films would go on to do. Neve Campbell would continue to be on Party of Five until 2000, then would later take on prominent roles in House of Cards and The Lincoln Lawyer. Campbell stated that she would not be returning to Scream 6 due to unfair pay rates that didn't reflect the value she brought to the films. For the first two pictures, Campbell has said she didn't make that much money, and it wasn't until until the third installment that she did alright, as she stated. She was promised a back end early on, but never got one since the studio claimed it didn't make a profit due to press or other reasons. Which sounds like some greed considering they've all done pretty well, especially when looking at the lifetime gross. So while it is sad that she won't be returning, I'm glad she didn't settle for any less than what she deserves for carrying this franchise. Her portrayal of Sidney Prescott would change how filmmakers viewed the final girl. Williamson says that he wanted to take the virgin girl cliche and put a new spin on it by asking the question, what if the girl did go all the way with someone? It was another way Williamson took what had become a cliche and reinvented it to create a new type of final girl.
You can never have sex. Big no-no!
Meanwhile,
Sidney demonstrated to the world that you can create your own ending and take control of the narrative. We see every character in some form gaslight or manipulate her, all while she's dealing with some serious trauma regarding her mother's death, which is what becomes popular in the media, resulting in her questioning who her mom even was. A way that I think can result in creating a character we can root for is by creating obstacles that pummel them to the ground. And this is a great example. We never see Sidney get a break. She's constantly questioned and pressured by others, making her doubt her entire view of reality, with her mother having cheated and her father potentially a killer. Then she gives in and accepts what everyone tells her in this scene where she loses her virginity to Billy, only to find out a few moments later that he's the one who killed her mom and kidnapped her dad. On top of that, Sid had nothing to do with her mother's actions. She was just living her normal life when some grungy dude decided to blame her for their parents' decisions. For someone who's not a fan of horror films, she sure experienced many horrific events, and in her teen years when you're already trying to figure out who you are as a person. But with all that, she's never presented as a weak character. Instead, she continuously defends herself verbally and physically and does not let her trauma define who she is. We meet her as a sweet girl next door type character and end with her kicking ass and ensuring that these horror villains won't be coming back into her life. Something that even Laurie Strode failed to do. Sidney Prescott is someone people can relate to. She makes mistakes. Regardless of her knowledge of slashers, Sid goes up the stairs. But notice how she attempts to leave out the front door, realizes it's locked, and in a panic goes to the quickest alternate route she can take. Any person not expecting to be attacked in their own home would likely do something similar. But what makes her extraordinary is that she takes a mistake she made and finds a way to overcome it. Even when it feels like the whole world is against you, Sid proves that you can overcome anything, even if it is a psychopathic boyfriend and his overly touchy best friend. So good on Neve Campbell for her portrayal of this character and bringing to life one of, if not the best final girl in horror history. And as for my leading man, Wes Craven, well, he would go on to make 7 more films, with his best post-Scream work, in my opinion, being Scream 4 and Red Eye. Unfortunately, he passed away from a brain tumor 4 weeks after his 76th birthday on August 30th, 2015, a day I remember so vividly because of the mourning in the horror community. With the release of Scream 5, there was a lot of attention on Wes Craven, with cast and crew members honoring his legacy, and the film itself even having an end title card that reads, "For Wes." But why? Well, let's dive into a few examples explicitly relating to Scream for why this cast would love this guy so much, both as a person and a filmmaker. From the day Williamson wrote the script, he was a Craven fan. With his hit films like A Nightmare on Elm Street and The Hills Have Eyes, it was apparent he was a modern master of horror. After Williamson got the news on who was directing the film, he went to the Miramax offices. When he walked into the lobby, the butterflies hit as he immediately recognized Craven sitting down. The two were introduced and had lunch together. Barely talking about the film, Williamson was unsure if Craven had even read the script and thought that maybe Craven had already dropped the project. Regardless, they had a wonderful time just chatting. Then Williamson received the best compliment by having Craven tell him that he had read the script and found it really scary. Matthew Lillard told the story of how encouraging Craven was and recounted a time during production when Craven did something that would stick with Lillard for the rest of his life. You see, it was his mom's birthday, so being the 90s, Lillard asked if there was an on-set cell phone he could use to call her. Craven then told him to tell his mom that he would win an Academy Award one day. Thinking it was a joke, Lillard responded with, "You tell her," to which Craven did. He got the phone and told his mother how he firmly believed that Lillard's acting talents would one day bring him an Academy Award.
And so in those moments of loss, feeling like you suck, this little nugget of Wes Craven saying you're going to win an Academy Award someday keeps you going. And it's a huge impact on being an artist and trying to stay true to who you are and continue.
Now, remember that this was Lillard's most prominent film at this point, and it must have been an incredibly heartwarming birthday gift for his mom to hear Wes Craven gush over her son. Lillard's often said that during the dips in his career, he'll hold on to these moments as proof that someone believes in him and uses that as inspiration.
I haven't mentioned Matthew Lillard yet, but he did a magnificent job playing Stu.
Oh yeah, which I mean, I admit to being, I think that was the most underwritten role in the film. To my own, I'll critique my own work. I felt like it was the underwritten role, and he just came on board and ran with it and turned it into one of the most memorable characters in the film.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic energy, great intelligence.
Jerry O'Connell, who would appear in Scream 2, wrote 2 papers on Wes Craven during his time at NYU Film School. When O'Connell got cast, he started geeking out that he would get to work with this horror director, to the point where he thought about bringing in the essays to have Craven sign them. On the Scream set, Craven acted as a father figure for many of the actors, which makes sense knowing that Craven spent years teaching English at a high school and college level, which is when he was making little films with his 16mm camera. Of course, during production, he would drink wine and be silly with the Scream cast. Skeet Ulrich has said that they didn't have any pranks or scares on set, but there was one time during the kitchen scene when he was getting a feel for the room and planned on scaring Campbell, but he looked over at Craven, who without saying a word, stopped him from doing anything. Neve Campbell says it was hard to keep that energy high during long shoot days, but called Craven one of the best acting directors she's worked with, likely because he used heavy imagery to help the actors push themselves, just like how we learned he did with Drew Barrymore. An example of a direction that stuck with Campbell was in the scene when Sidney found out who the killers were. Campbell was trying to act in varying levels of fear to avoid a monotonous performance and keep it interesting. This was a moment where Sid was about to get her strength back. Her energy was quickly depleting, but Craven came to her and whispered in her ear, "Imagine you've got 1,000 bullets ricocheting through your body," then walked away. This note stuck with her since it gave her that push she needed at the moment. Craven has been described as quiet, gentle, wise, and silly on set. Both Campbell and Cox have recounted times when they would be filming something so horrific for the silver screen, and Craven would be behind the monitor just giggling to himself.
I remember we got really slap happy on the set. Something made him laugh, and I have this video of him. I was filming him. He got the giggles. And to see Wes Craven, you always think of him as like the king of horror. He is so silly. He couldn't stop laughing, couldn't stop, and you'd see him just kind of try to not break, and be like, okay.
Clearly, Craven had a great sense of humor. The first time Cox had to scream for her life, she needed a bit of direction from Craven and asked how it felt like to get shot or stabbed, and what kind of emotions would run through her head when encountering a life or death situation like that. To which Craven responded with, "Courtney, I don't know. It's never happened to me." Arquette would also encounter Craven's dry sense of humor when after a take, Craven would tell him, "David, that was unusable." When Arquette would ask for direction, he would respond with, "Do it again, do it faster, and do it better."
I've always been a Wes Craven fan. I'm scared of him.
Cox has even stated that she gives a lot of credit to Craven for Arquette and her getting together. How awesome is that?
Wes sat me down and said, "David, she really likes you. Just get your act together."
But behind the scares and the horror, many don't know that Craven had many interests outside of filmmaking. He was very into psychology and was a self-taught ornithologist. One of his favorite things was simply sitting outside and observing birds. In fact, while doing reshoots in the snowy Michigan weather for Scream 4, the production had wrapped for the day. Roger L. Jackson got in the car that would take him back to the hotel, and while driving, he spots Wes in the dead dark of night out in the snow holding his camera up, taking pictures of the nocturnal birds. This was the last time Jackson ever saw Craven, and what a beautiful last image to have of someone. He remembers thinking, after all that he's put in tonight, Craven's out here in the cold and the snow, following something that feeds his heart. Skeet Ulrich got to work with Craven again for a small scene in the 2005 film Cursed, and even though Ulrich's scenes never made it in the movie, he had bonded closer to Craven since the two now had more things in common, such as they both had open heart surgery and they loved doing crossword puzzles. In addition, they discussed woodworking, which Craven was getting into, while Ulrich had already loved building furniture. Ulrich described Craven as a much calmer man, but noticed he was more tired and had basically given up trying to do something new. Craven constantly tried to explore other genres but would get told, one more horror film, then you can do what you want, after each project, including Scream. But this explains why Craven explored other hobbies where he could feel more in control of what he wanted to do rather than constantly being played with. In addition, the pressure to make the sequels as good as the first film must have been mentally taxing.
I think, all of the filmmakers that I know just make the best film they can make. And that's all you can do. I mean, you're really expressing parts of yourself that you don't even understand. Sometimes you'll see a script and say, oh, that really speaks to me, and then you do it. But, I just like any of us to do something new that we can look at and say, that's really terrific. I have never seen that on a film before.
I don't want to stir the pot, but here's Lillard's experience when he last saw Craven while visiting Campbell on the set of Scream 4.
The last time I saw it was on Scream 4. And I was visiting Dab on set, and everyone, I'll never forget it. This isn't an indictment directly on the cast, but he was giving notes in a scene, and all the actors were on their phones like this while he was, no way. And to this day, I will never forget that moment. It's incredibly, when a director's directing you, obviously there's a moment of respect, and they're giving you guidance in your performance. And they're all like this.
Neve Campbell describes the last time she saw Craven was when they and their spouses all met up to watch an Elvis Costello show. The night ended with them all chatting under the stars, knowing that Craven had a brain tumor. Campbell took this opportunity to thank Craven for believing in her and changing the trajectory of her life. Many of the cast and immediate crew for Scream attended Craven's funeral, where they all got together again after a long time of not seeing each other. Kevin Williamson says that he never realized how much of an impact Craven had on his life until he passed away, and that the feelings still feel raw, which is why he was worried about doing Scream 5 6 years later. Craven was a mentor to Williamson and would give him tips on what to do and what not to do in the industry, literally changing his life. Many of the actors heavily mourned Craven because not only were they saying goodbye to a significant father figure, but they were also saying goodbye to their youth. Most of the actors in Scream were unknown at the time, and they had all met and gotten to where they are today thanks to Craven. Craven grew up in a religiously strict household where his parents believed that films were the devil's work, excluding Disney flicks. He didn't even watch his first non-Disney film until he was a senior in college, and to avoid getting caught watching his first movie, How to Kill a Mockingbird, he had to hitchhike a ride to another town. In his career, Craven made some of the most genuinely horrific films that likely helped him release many stored up emotions, which is why he believed that there was no need to be gentle with audience members and that you couldn't make a film too scary.
People don't want to go and be scared. They are scared. That we have resident fears, from real things. I mean, let's not forget real life, So the reason I think this works for kids is that those fears are evoked in these movies and brought out in the course of the story in a way that it has some resolution at the end.
Watch out, Jimmy. Those around. Oh, there he is. I told you. Right around the corner. Jimmy, look behind you. Look behind you. Turn around. Behind you. Oh, turn. Behind you. Behind you.
I guess there's no transition to help me this time. Oh, wait.
Ghostface uses a modified 8-inch buck 120 knife, which really hurts. And rule number 3 to making a great video, make it as entertaining as you can, even if it is silly and absurd. As long as you're not spreading misinformation and you're going at a good pace where viewers can entertain themselves, there's a better chance that you can help someone who's maybe having a rough day enjoy themselves for like a few minutes or, a few hours. Making any sort of art can be difficult and time-consuming. Many times you can be your own worst enemy. But to me, the best projects are the ones with passion behind them. So be like Kevin Williamson. Write and make the thing you're dying to see. And who knows, maybe it'll be the next big hit. But until next time, I'll see you on the sequel.
Thank you for watching the 2-hour and 55-minute video on Scream. I hope you guys had an incredible time. I love video stores. I love, I do have 2 blockbuster movie awards for Scream or Scream 2 or something like that. So I always loved going to the video store and, watching horror films as a kid with my friends. I hope you guys enjoy all the videos that Renee put out there, and I hope you guys keep watching all the Scream movies. Thank you. Love you.